being a great poker player has always been at the forefront of, and like one of my biggest goals. So I just find it would be unacceptable to cut corners when it comes to doing anything poker related. I think over time, it's actually the more global goal is to get yourself to a mental state where you don't even question, giving it one more rep or pushing yourself to the max. It's that just becomes your default.
Daniel Dvoress, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
So I usually like to start these off either going through the person's background or my relationship to the person when we met each other and whatnot. But I want to flash forward a little bit to maybe a year or two after I've known you, kind of express a lesser known side of Dan. So I wonder if you know where I'm going with this.
I have a few suspicions.
Okay. Let's start most recently. Montenegro, playing a lovely game of paddle with my friends Stevie, Orpin, Leon, and Dan shows up, and we're all excited to play paddle with Dan. And he walks right up with a ball, and he walks to about 15 feet of me, maybe closer, and just pegs it at my face, to the horror of everyone in attendance. Let's back up a little bit. Monte Carlo, a year and a half ago, we're in a very crowded elevator. I am one of the last people to get on. We're all trying to come back from dinner break. I'm right up against the elevator, and Dan just shoves me into the elevator doors. Very, very forcefully. Flashback, maybe 2 days prior to that? I have a hot cup of coffee, and Dan jumps on me, spilling the hot coffee all over me.
I feel like I should be able to defend myself after each instance.
Jump in.
Okay, the elevator, no excuse. I had a lot of pent-up energy and it needed to go somewhere. The coffee cup incident, I didn't know that you were holding a hot beverage. I saw you walking and I just wanted to jump on your back. Me throwing a dead tennis ball at your face, that's a bit of a gray area because I felt really bad, but I missed. I was aiming at your body, and I don't know if it was just my subconscious that's like, yeah, you got to go a little bit higher, get him in the face, but I was trying to hit you in the body.
Well, I had been so habituated at that point. I should point out, by the way, for the viewers, I had to play the whole next two levels with hot coffee. Turned to cold coffee relatively quickly all over my body, but I was just covered in coffee stains for the next two levels because we had no time. But by the time you pegged the depressurized tennis ball, yes, I'll give you that, at me, and everyone else was looking around like, why did he do that? I think that was Orpin's immediate reaction. I was so habituated to you attacking me that I was just like, because he's Dan, what are you talking about? He's half retarded. I don't know.
Well, you should. There's only a few people that I attack, and you are one of them, so you should be honored.
Well, that's the thing. So I need to follow it up with, pretty much after all these attacks, and most mornings when we're on a Triton trip, I then wake up to a text that'll say, coffee, pussy? So invariably, I end up going and getting coffee with you. We go for a walk and then play tennis or something like that, which, as I'm in this different surrounding, this is my father's home office in Massachusetts, and my father is a psychiatrist. So it begs the question, have I made friends with my bully? Am I friends with my abuser? What's happening here? What is mentally or emotionally going on that I've continued to be your good friend?
Do you feel abused?
This sounds like abuser talk. This sounds like... Continue. I want to hear more on this.
Well, I feel like if I say anything here, it's just making things worse.
Well, I'm definitely going to be paging through this and trying to figure out where you fit in.
Boy. That thing, hey, as someone that has almost completed a degree in psychology, that thing's getting thicker and thicker every year. Not to take away from actual various psychological issues, but I feel like some of the more recent additions, it's kind of crossing into the everyone's got something.
What I'm propping my computer up on. resonate at
yeah,
all?
that just I don't think it's borderline for me.
Fair enough.
A few moments ago.
Oh, it'd be so great if you just fell off the chair right now. That would be a great podcast intro. If you just wiped out.
That would excite you, wouldn't it?
It would cause a momentary influx of pleasure.
A couple of years ago, when I was interviewing Ike for the book, I asked him about kind of dialing in what it looks like playing his A game, playing his C game. And he mentioned you and Stevie as two players who are just unbelievably dialed in pretty much all the time. And I wanted to ask you, one, how you feel about that assessment, and two, about the pros and cons of being dialed in, because I think, for me, I view it as somewhat of an expenditure, kind of putting all of my energy into focusing on the table. And I don't think it has to be like that. I think that it's not necessarily zero sum. And I'm wondering if you have any pointers for how to kind of make it, I don't know about positive sum, but not necessarily zero sum, spending energy or putting energy into focusing on the table.
So two separate things there. The act of being really dialed in and really paying attention to something, there's no way around it. It's draining. There are good ways to do it, there's bad ways to do it, but no matter how you do it, you're going to get drained. I would say that first, you have to accept that you can't actually be 100% dialed in all the time. Even though it might look like that to an outsider, there's going to be different, I guess, tiers of how dialed in you are. And so it's, somewhat important to manage that. I think you could get the amplitude between your, A+ dialed in state and your C- dialed in state. I think you can narrow down or decrease that amplitude a little bit. But I think that sort of amplitude is necessary to maintaining focus for a very long time. I would say approaching things with a genuine curiosity and maybe looking for, as you're getting dialed in, like making little challenges for yourself in terms of what you want to look at or what you want to pay attention to, even if it's technically suboptimal. Kind of making little mini games for yourself alleviates a lot of the drain. It's still your attention. There's a finite amount of it, more or less. I think that's another complex topic, but going about it in a fun way and kind of tickling your own brain a little bit makes it easier for sure.
Did you find it easier in the early days of high rollers? Not necessarily just because, you were fresh to them and maybe just a little bit more ramped up. Maybe let's say playing your 10th 50K as opposed to your 100th. But also, I'm thinking back, let's say 8 years ago, even regs were all over the place as far as sizing. It feels like there was more to pay attention to. Not to say everyone is uniform everywhere now, but maybe the uniformity is there pre-flop and on the flop in many cases. There are just a lot of kind of one-size spots for many players where maybe before they were betraying more. I'm curious if it was easier for you back in the day to kind of stay focused in reg versus reg hands.
I think realistically too many variables have changed since then to give an answer that I would feel is truthful or realistic. So first, towards the beginning of my high stakes career, and this is true to an extent with anyone, there's so many other external factors going on where right now I'm in a spot where I feel like I can comfortably allow myself to kind of do whatever in terms of how I present myself at the table as I'm paying attention to things, or potentially not paying attention to things. But certainly towards the beginning of your career, there's a lot of this external pressure to be dialed in a certain way, if that makes sense, right? Like, especially if you're selling big pieces, which almost everyone is when they're starting out in high rollers anyway. You can't be messing around. So there's this external pressure of, well, I want to look like I'm paying attention. And that takes effort too. And actually that takes away from you paying the most attention in the way that's comfortable for yourself, if that makes sense.
Tournament Savagery is 25 hours of structured tournament strategy by Nick Petrangelo and Daniel Dvoress. This course covers pre-bubble, bubble, in the money, and the final table broken down like never before. We also cover post-flop ICM, blind versus blind, and much more. Buy now for $9.99 only at GTOLab.com.
So, there's variables like that. Also, the player pools back then were a lot smaller, which actually made it more useful and interesting to pay attention because you could correlate many more things since you'd be playing the same people all over. Whereas, the recent Tritons, they've had hundreds of uniques.
Mm-hmm.
And I just know with some of the people that I'm close with, guys that you're generally friends with, close with, you tend to pay extra attention, or I guess the hands that you play against them are a little bit more salient. And the past few trips, like, there's just been people that I'm like, whoa, I just haven't even played with this person this trip. And that's becoming more and more common. So, incentives are a little bit different. Player pools are different. And yes, like you said, the technical aspect of what people are doing is different as well. The hunger, sure, it was in the sense that you put it a little bit higher towards the start, but you kind of got to make your own hunger along the way. So, I think that's still there. And the drive to try to pay attention is still there just as much.
Mm-hmm. When you mention that, I don't know any way around this, but I think about how in the early days of high rollers, there were some more wrecks. I can think of a few specifically that I heard were kind of super put off by how slow people were. The shot clocks certainly helped with that. But I think it was also how intimidating pros felt like they needed to act at the table. Sometimes intimidating with stare downs, but other times just kind of what you were talking about, make sure I look like I'm paying attention. And in the process of doing that, that's where some of the kind of unfriendliness or perceived unfriendliness came off that I think, I'm not going to say crippled the high stakes, but I think it could have blossomed into something much bigger if the way that your generation of high stakes players, I put us in a separate generation despite being the same age because I wasn't playing them, but the people who've been, let's say, playing them for 12 years or whatnot, you guys have a comfort at the table that I think the attempts to intimidate VIPs have gone down to, close to zero, everyone understanding that they're so integral to the ecosystem. And I wonder essentially if people from your generation were acting like you are now 12 years ago, if we would have a much more fruitful ecosystem.
Maybe it's so hard to say because generally speaking, VIPs in high stakes, they're so diverse in terms of what drives them, what backgrounds they come from, what their incentives are for playing, what dissuades them from playing. I would say this. I think that the high stakes tournaments that take place today are a little bit, on average, less. There's less intensity that you're referring to. At least that's how it feels like to me. Again, many factors. A lot of people have been around them for a while. But everyone's got, many 100Ks under their belt now, so it's kind of nothing new. But also there's the aspect that I think people miss, that I don't think that if you're truly trying to get the best reads and the most information, doing this thing where you're just staring someone down, super serious, super intense, is just not the optimal way to do it at all.
Yeah.
It might look cool, so you think, and it looks like you're, really, really intense and really trying super hard. But the person that you're staring at, or, the general table vibe, there's a response to that too. And so if the vibe is super serious and super kind of not loose in terms of how everyone's acting, all of the things that you are trying to pay attention to, they tend to go away. And there is this balance of keeping things light and yet still managing to pay attention. And then there's like this other complex layer to, if I'm looking for something like a nervous response and I'm just staring you down, that in of itself is likely to provoke a nervous response. Really what I want to happen is to create a comfortable situation for you and see if you're still nervous or whatever other thing I'm looking for, and not do anything that might actually make that thing that I'm looking for happen superficially.
I think a lot of that came when I think about some of the really heavy stares. A lot of it came not necessarily from trying to get a read as much as ostensibly that's what it was about, but realistically, a lot of it was just trying to get people who were kind of wimps to not bluff and then simplify the game, where if you think this player is going to vastly underbluff you because you are trying to intimidate them, then your decision tree gets a lot easier. You can do so many things. And when I think about some of these players who kind of, in my mind, were going that route, they were going really light for value in a lot of ways, basically expecting that their opponent would never put in a bluff raise. And the game gets a lot easier if you get that simplification. But
yeah,
good. Well, one thing I was thinking when you mentioned the Recs being diverse, I agree. They're there for different reasons, but there's one commonality. I mean, I think it's a human commonality for the most part, but professionals are forced to go against the grain here, which is they're impatient. There's one thing that kind of binds them, which is they don't want to wait. Poker at its foundation is a game where you have to have patience. Regs get around that by 20 tabling online, or if you're like me, you play heads up for a living. But realistically, that's kind of the first thing you need to be a good poker player is patience. And you see very, very few Recs who kind of, they have their different ways around it, where some of them, they play in loose, big anti-cash games where, patience is not quite as required. Others develop a limping strategy so that it doesn't cost them quite as much. But I'd be hard pressed to find a rec who doesn't have a problem with patience at the table. And that's where I think people taking excessive time in particular was kind of scaring them away.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the other issue relating to that is, while I agree with this assessment, I think if you asked most, not all, but most recreational players about this kind of self-realization of, are you an impatient person that wants to see a bunch of flops and play a bunch of hands and have decisions and always be in action, they would kind of say no. And I think that's part of the reason that most Recs don't like playing shorthanded. Whereas that's clearly it's clearly one of the solutions, right? Mm-hmm. You just make 6-handed tournaments, but then you end up playing 4 or 5-handed pretty often, especially towards the beginning of the tournament. And then as it gets down to the last few tables, and actually most Recs would rather not have that. So they would rather play 7 or 8-handed.
Well, they want to play hands, but they don't want to bluff. When you play 4 or 5-handed, you have to bluff, and they don't want to play Queen-8 offsuit. And, that's the kind of thing when it folds 2 on the button super frequently. So I think that they do have this understanding, however, whatever terms they may couch it in, they have this understanding that they don't want to play shorthanded because they're going to get absolutely murdered, which is correct. Please don't listen to that part if you're a VIP. Shorthand, it's great. But at the same time, they want to play. They very few of them, that typically they're pretty high powered people who kind of get what they want in most areas of life, and not what many people want unless they're on a, Buddhist retreat, is sit around and do nothing.
So I think I partially disagree with the assessment just because I think it's a little bit more nuanced. So like, to give an example, this is probably 15 years ago, but do you remember a certain Russian fish that would play a lot of 25-50 on stars?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think a lot of.
Did you ever meet him in person?
I have not.
Okay. I only knew him by his screen name.
Yeah, I won't say the screen name.
Yeah.
I think most old school players will kind of know.
Yeah, the whole Star Smash ecosystem ran around him for years.
Yes, and so he loved to play full ring, right? Like, that was his go-to game. He'd like the full ring 25-50 games. And I think that given the style that he wanted to play, which is kind of loose passive and just VPIP a bunch, had he been playing 6 max, he would have lost at a slower rate. I genuinely think that, because if you're going to play King 9 off from every position, it's better if you don't ever play UTG 9.
You're picking a real anomaly of a guy for this. I don't know that you can build a theory of Rex around this fella.
Oh, no. I'm not saying that this applies to everyone, but I'm saying that if your general approach is, you're not going to be folding anything suited from the button versus an open, or anything reasonable suited, or you're always opening any suited connector, it's better if there's 6 players at the table.
You want 3 less people to pick up a premium because
so I think it's a little bit nuanced, and it depends. And I think that if they're there for fun, I think there's like a happy medium of handedness, where, but also game formats where you get to VPIP more and it's not as costly.
That's a tricky thing. I guess while we're on the topic of VIPs, I want to ask you about how much easier it is to get better as a VIP today than when you started out, because it's my feeling, I wonder if you're in agreement, that somebody who is minus 30 ROI today in, let's say, a Triton 50K, they're getting to minus 10 quite quickly if they work hard, and then really closing in on break even if they're a hard worker who really cares about getting good. Do you feel that's true? If so, what do you kind of attribute it to? If not, let's fight.
I would say it's true, but it depends on what type of learner you are. So if you're someone that is just willing to do a lot of brute force, rigorous work, because nowadays there's just so many tools and solutions and everything available, it is really, if you put in the work and then you adhere to it, then you're going to get better. You're going to close into between minus 10% and break even rather quickly. And I think that given the background of a lot of VIPs, that they're just naturally able to do that sort of thing. Now, the counter argument to that is, if you go back 10 years, you have a lot less tools available, but at the same time, just playing a reasonable strategy where you have, a reasonable VPIP, don't call 3 bets, too light, kind of do basic things. I think because the fields were softer, also in some ways make it easier to get closer to break even, but there's not this like really structured way of, I just need to drill these spots. This is where I have leaks and I have all of these tools available to me to fix them. I just need to put in the hours. It's a lot more soft skill stuff if you go back a dozen years.
That's fair. I think, though, for that second group you're talking about, because this is the group I'm very familiar with. These are the people who come to me. They say, look, I don't want to be running sims. Jon's my guy. Those types of players today, they're seeing all our cards. It's all of these cards up Triton streams. You've got Poker Go, you've got GG Millions, Final Tables, and poker doesn't have this physical component like sports do. You can just emulate what you see. It's not that easy to emulate what you're seeing on the river, because obviously there is, not simply the bet size and checks that you saw on the flop and turn are going to correlate. But pre-flop and flop is very easy to kind of clone somebody's game. It feels like they're not putting the whole puzzle together simply by watching a stream, but so much information is out there. And then even if they're just using, GTO Lab and GTO Wizard, depending on, whether it's ICM or not, and looking hands up afterwards, people, they're catching so much of what's going on without ever running a sim themselves.
Yeah, I agree with that. What I would add to that is also the strategies that you see early on in the hand at early nodes from players that are good. They're so much more converged nowadays. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't see someone open 8-3 suited and cutoff like someone that's a good reg in 99% of spots nowadays. Whereas if you go back like 15 years, some good players maybe would have opened that in some spots, and it probably would have been the right play in some spots. So then you just have so much more noise where, there's multiple people that are good. They're playing very different strategies at all these pre-flop nodes, and it's hard to make sense of it. Whereas now you kind of look and everything's a lot more converged. And that I agree. It's a lot easier to look through a bunch of streams and just recognize the patterns and repeat them.
Are you thinking of a specific 8-3 suited? Because I remember one 2 stops ago that was pretty off.
No, I was not thinking of a specific 8-3 suited. Did you open 8-3 suited from somewhere where you were?
It wasn't me, no.
Okay.
I'll give a hint though. It was a once podcast guest. You can think that one back.
Oof. Okay.
What does it mean in poker terms to be someone who's doing, quote, hard stuff? And how do you see that contrasting with fancy play syndrome?
Well, hard stuff, in my mind, is, of course, there's multiple definitions, but what I lean towards thinking when I hear that in the poker sense is that you are actively pursuing low reach nodes or low frequency nodes, not necessarily doing things that don't make sense or aren't plus EV. Usually it's solver approved stuff, John, not Jon internal.
I tried to do impossible stuff.
So I would say it's the active pursuit of those nodes. How to distinguish it? Like, where's the line between that and fancy play syndrome? Well, I would say it is the reasoning behind it. So the way I see it is there's two really good reasons that you would want to pursue these sort of rare nodes, alternative lines, or do hard things while you're playing a poker hand. The first kind of global reason is for the sake of just ending up at unconventional nodes a little bit more often. And just having the drive to do that for no reason isn't a good reason. It needs to be backed up by you actually think you'll outperform the person you're playing against at these nodes. But you need to have that sort of reasoning to back it up for it to not just be FPS, basically. The other reason to pursue these nodes is because against certain players, it might matter that if you don't, and if you never take these lines, other lines that you take start to suffer. And often that will just be because you lack bluffs at a certain node. Now, where it sort of unravels pretty often is when you're up against someone weaker, let's say, and you're getting into like these weird, tricky spots where you actually don't know how they'll respond. And most of your money against this player would be made by just bluffing certain runouts and then getting value with good hands, kind of like simple as that. That's kind of where I think it starts to unravel pretty often, or pursuing these sorts of lines against pretty good players, but where it's not necessary for the balance part. And you're also in a very soft tournament with high future EV, where now you're getting into these high variance spots for no clear benefit and potentially taking future opportunities away from yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when you talk about, let's say, a WPT or a WSOP 3K or 5K event, there's often these decisions emerge where maybe half your table you view as peers and, relatively on par with you. And then another half are somewhere between minus 60 ROI whales and minus 20, 25 ROI fish. And you get into a hand, let's say you and I get into a spot, cut off versus big blind, and it's 50 big blinds deep, and I have King Jack on a Jack 3-2 flush draw. And we're looking at a pretty high frequency check raise against a small bet. And I'm looking around, how do you kind of go about, in my situation, determining whether you want to play check raise or check call, or if you'd rather take a bluff, we can give me, I don't know, something like 4-5, a conventional mixing obvious bluff.
So this is actually a great example because it gives the opportunity to talk about like both of the good reasons that you'd want to kind of pursue, hard lines. So the first consideration is, am I someone that is actually actively trying to exploit you potentially not check raising enough? Mm-hmm. That there's that consideration. The other consideration here, separate from that, is, how much EV are you really leaking by passing up on a check raise in that spot, even if I know that you're passing up on the check raise in that spot. And so practically speaking, what my approach in those spots generally is to skew a little bit towards not doing the hard thing because, really good future game, I want to reduce variance against other good players, but not completely eliminate it from my game. Mm-hmm. That tends to be my approach. And I think a lot of people kind of look at this node as a little bit black and white, where they're either kind of like, well, you're up against a good player, you should try to emulate a solver strategy and check raise 70% of the time or whatever. And then there's other people that are like, well, it's, you could check raise or call at equilibrium and you're in such a good spot. Why would you ever check raise against a good player? Just call every single time. Who cares? Play against these other whales that are at the table in future hands and don't bust here. And generally, I think that an in-between approach where, okay, maybe you're not check raising as high frequency, but you're still check raising sometimes, allows you to not leak too much EV, and it also allows you to sort of do these mini tests in terms of testing what you think the opponent response actually is, and if they're also doing things to actively try to exploit you or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of those things I feel like a number of years ago, you could just kind of have a dogmatic one-way approach there. You could be someone who says, oh, I'm going to fight hard in all these spots because my opponents actually wimp out and they're looking at the EV of the table. And, maybe that's true against some opponents. Or you go in the other direction. You say, really, the only hands I'm going to check raise are pocket twos, pocket threes, jack three suited, the most obvious value. But the problem today, I think, even if you play in relatively large field events, is that word travels. They see certain things. And when you end up, let's say, show up with ace jack on the check call line there, it makes a very big impact, because most of the time, if you're someone who calls ace jack big blind versus cutoff in that situation, you've kind of spilled your view on the situation to that player, anyone who paid attention, and anyone they send texts to and study with, etc. And word kind of travels really quickly, even if you're not someone who's making videos or, coaching. It leaves you really open to exploits that you never know where it came from. It's kind of like, you think socially when if you and I are talking right now and I shit talk our mutual friend Nick in a way that seems especially vicious, obviously as an intelligent person, you come away from that being like, well, John's probably doing that to me as well, to other people. And I think, we get that at this point. You kind of understand that. But in poker, it seems like people who understand that very simple concept still seem somewhat oblivious to the idea of how information travels and where they're being exploited. And they, it'll never show up unless someone tells you, this is what I did to you and this is why.
Yeah. And I think that oftentimes it's easy to gloss over the ways in which you can get got because it's often in subtle ways. So going with like the same example that we've been talking about, now you play this an identical spot the next orbit, and let's say you have queen jack, you check call again pure because that's kind of what you're doing, and you're kind of thinking, well, this guy's maybe just playing an equilibrium strategy, and at equilibrium I can call or check raise with queen jack, so it's like same EV. Well, it's not anymore, because your check raise range is now too strong. A smart cutoff is not going to bluff as much or value bet as thin on future streets. So it's not that you made less money with queen jack in the check raise node, but now in this check call line that you took, you also make less money just kind of everywhere. It's in subtle ways. It's often hard to notice, but it does really add up, and I think people just gloss over that.
I think that's exactly right. It's in subtle ways. That's an EV loss that many people have never even thought about. Is I check called queen jack on jack 3-2, and Daniel Dvoress did not give me 50 big blinds with king 5 no backdoor. Right. And it's like, didn't really seem like I did anything wrong, but no, some other really great player who was check raising king jack the majority of the time. Dan said their range is weak enough, and he just piled 50 big blinds in flop turn river with, some kind of difficult to find bluffs for many people. King 5 no backdoor, maybe it looks pretty appealing to me there.
Yeah, or even it's just kind of to give a less extreme example, on some run out, I just end up checking down jack 9.
Yeah, exactly.
And you don't even get to see my hand because you table queen jack, I muck, and it's like you don't even know that the exploit happened, but you should have won a lot more against my hand, but you didn't.
Yep. All right. I'm going to read you a very flattering quote. Get ready.
Uh-oh. You have a sneaky smile on your face.
I mean, I hate being complimented in terms of, obviously I love it, the feeling, but having to respond to someone, and especially in public on a podcast, that's
why you're so happy. You know that I'm going to be uncomfortable with what you say next, and that is why you're happy. No,
it's not happy. I'm actually uncomfortable.
You look pretty happy.
No, that's my.
Oh, this is a mask. Okay.
This is I'm smiling out of uncomfort for you, having to sit through being complimented and then try to keep a straight face and be like, oh yes, let me downplay things.
Okay.
So. With that pressure added, here goes. This is from a former student of mine who, kind of watches everything we make. And he's a run at once coach. So he knows, the process of video making and whatnot. He says, the videos Dvoress made for the course are in no exaggeration the best videos I've ever seen. He's a true genius because he can explain difficult things in a way that normal people can comprehend. That was not a solicited endorsement, but can you talk a bit about that process? How you can talk about it in terms of the course if you want, but how you are able to make difficult topics easier to comprehend, if that's natural for you or you give it a lot of thought.
Honestly, it's because I'm a bit of a dummy myself. So I have to kind of, I'm someone that really pursues the underlying mechanics and concepts behind things. I think that's a lot more important than just memorizing general strategies or outputs or patterns. I think understanding the underlying mechanics is a lot more important. And I have to often dumb things down for myself to have it make sense. So I think that's part of the process. And also I try to purposely work with the people that I coach. I purposely try to coach a very diverse group of people in terms of their understanding of poker, their how much and how often they play, how seriously they take it. And I think if you can't really explain something that's pretty difficult to someone that's maybe not at your level, if you can't put it in their terms, then chances are you don't get it yourself either, which is fine, but that just means that you have to work harder at understanding it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I've given this example many times. I don't know if I ever said it on the podcast, but I have a 10-year-old, and anyone who has a child realizes that you don't understand most things because you will get asked all these questions about how weather systems work, how the economy works, and you think you know, but no, once you have to explain with some degree of depth, you just have this, cursory understanding. You have, very vague general sense of things. And I think that that's very much the case for most of us with poker. Is at a certain point you're going to be like, because the solver said so, and it's like that's where your knowledge ends.
Yeah, it's because kind of bits and pieces, but without actually knowing the underlying mechanics. It's kind of like, why do rain clouds form in low pressure systems? Well, that's just the way it is. The weather person just shows you the low pressure system, and then there's always rain there. That's just what I've seen, and it's just the identical thing to kind of being like, well, why do we bet big on Jack 9-6 after we've opened in the hijack? Unless you understand the underlying mechanics of what's going on, your answer oftentimes will be, well, I've just seen that. That's kind of how it goes. And I view learning hard poker concepts as sort of an approach from two opposite directions. And I think it kind of has to be that way because there has to be some sort of execution in order to actually get the underlying concepts as well. And so I think with something like c-betting size, you want to simultaneously be recognizing some patterns while also trying to figure out the underlying mechanics. And you have to do both, because if you only focus on doing it from one direction, either you won't get enough reps in execution, either through playing or even like mentally thinking through things to really get like the backbone to being able to map the concepts onto something tangible. Or if you're just learning the patterns, then you don't actually understand what's going on, so you don't really get it, and you can't explain the mechanics. You just know the way it is, which is not the same as knowing what is happening.
Yeah. So on that line, then I want to ask you about the player who doesn't want to study, the one who says, look, I love poker. I want to get good at poker. I don't want to run sims. I don't want to look at charts for, 30 minutes a day for the next 2 years. What do they do? How do they get as good as they can? Where's the low hanging fruit? I'm not saying someone who is, 100% allergic to charts, they're going to, you can bank on them putting in 10 minutes of study a day, 3 days a week. So there's something there, but for the most part, they want to play poker. They want to watch poker. How do they get as good as they can get?
So first, I think that my
Hi, Dan's course. Go ahead.
yeah, by my course. Actually, no. Well, it depends what they mean by study. So first, I think my opinion of such an approach, I have a lot more leniency towards it. I think if you ask most of the players in our circle, they will kind of go like, this person will never be successful. You can't have that sort of approach. Mm-hmm. And certainly for someone that learns the way that I do, that is true. However, I definitely know a couple of people that can form extremely good intuitive conclusions that are actually very close to what equilibriums look like without actually studying them. I think it takes a particular type of person, particular type of brain wiring, but there are people like that they can just get a couple of opinions from different people that they trust, and then actually get an intuitive sense of how the spot works, mm-hmm. without actually doing what we would consider studying. So first, if you're someone that's looking to be quite successful, but also not study, I would have an honest look within myself. If you're one of those people that can have one of those approaches, then that's kind of totally fine. I think a lot of people, they're just not wired to learn that way. And for the people that are not wired to learn that way, where they're getting bits and pieces and can form an intuitive conclusion, yeah, there's kind of no way around it. Like, there's not really a magic pill, unfortunately. Yet.
Wait.
I would, yeah.
Can't they cheat?
Yes, they can cheat.
That's kind of a magic pill.
But also, they can just steal money. I think what years of experience in the high-stakes scene has taught me that the best way to get rich is to just steal other people's money and then just not give it back.
Can you do a course on selling 300% for tournaments? What about just a full scam course? Like how to take chips off other people's stack without being detected.
Yeah, I think,
obviously don't do it somewhere they're tracking chip stacks like Triton, but
yeah. You can't be a Triton.
What other good scams are
there? Rigging mystery bounty draws.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
That is a good one. That's actually, we're getting way off topic here, but
I think we're zooming in on the good stuff.
That I'm kind of iffy on. For stuff like at Triton, of course, I have full trust in the system and stuff, but it would be so easy to. It seems like it would be so easy to at least get a soft edge with not that much sophisticated, stuff. Even a little bit of information about, certain envelopes being marked in subtle ways.
What was Orpin's theory early on in the early days of mysteries? He had something that he felt was worth at least 0.5%. You remember?
Well, what was definitely worth 0.5% for Orpin is if you had a mystery bounty pull, he would buy it 99.5 cents on the dollar.
Somebody sold them below market rate.
So that makes you a good 0.5%.
That's fair. I mean,
but the serious answer to that, well, the less serious but also more serious answer to that is his theory was that it's obviously not going to be the top one, right? It's not the good envelopes aren't going to be at the top.
Yeah, okay.
And it can't be at the bottom. But it will probably be close to the bottom because, they want to have the suspense and have it be one of the ones that are drawn last. You don't want the big pulls out of circulations early. So, you go to the bottom of the stack, you go a few up, and then you pull one. That was his theory.
That kind of makes me think like if right now, if I ask you to pick a number 1 to 10 and it's a competition where if I get it, I win, you lose. I feel like it says something about a person's competitive personality or their experience in competitions in terms of what number they choose, specifically oriented around the 1, the 5, and the 10, how they view those numbers as far as whether they're safer or less safe. I think that has a lot to do with a person's competitive experience.
Yeah, and I think if you just asked an average person off the street that question, like I think 6 or 7, instead of those two getting picked 20% of the time, they would just get picked like 40% of the time or something.
Yeah, I think everything that's not the 1, the 5, and the 10 is just goes rockets up, and those get at least cut in half.
So yeah, that was Orpin's theory. But to get back to the not necessarily rigging, but kind of like soft cheating in these things. I have had kind of some concerns, more kind of theoretical concerns. Not to say that I've ever been in a situation where I thought anything like that was happening, but there's just not that many preventative measures along the way to stop some of the good envelopes from having like a particular nick in them or something. Mm-hmm. And again, it's not like it would take a bunch of EV away from everyone. And if you're drawing and you don't know, your odds are still the same. But of course, if someone that knows has a little bit of an edge, then it takes a little bit of EV away from you.
Yeah. I feel like the easy fix, not that they're going to implement it, but you do kind of like what's the lottery? They kind of pull ping pong balls out, and so the envelopes all have a number on them, and then each person walks up and a ping pong ball comes up one of those sucker machines, or like what they do for bingo or whatever. You kind of roll the numbers and you pull, and that way nobody gets to touch the envelopes.
Yeah, the thing with envelopes being in a box that you get to touch in a unknown order, they don't get shuffled. That kind of doesn't really.
Seems like an unnecessary risk, and we're kind of just waiting until something bad happens before doing something.
Introducing the GTO Lab ICM Trainer. Train all positions at once. The new and better way of learning poker tournaments. Master all stages of the tournament. Pre-bubble, bubble, in the money, 2 and 3 tables left, and the final table. Learn how to crush tournaments from our coaches and get the most out of the trainer. We have the biggest ICM library ever, with over 14,000 solutions created by Nick Petrangelo and Daniel Dvoress. Join GTO Lab today and stay ahead of the curve.
All right, you ready for some fast fire?
Oh God, I'm the worst at this. Sure.
Excellent. Who's the funniest person in high stakes poker that most fans wouldn't know is funny?
Sam Greenwood.
All the GTO Lab coaches are playing Survivor. Who's your toughest competition?
Define Survivor, like Survivor as it is on the game show?
Correct, the game show. Yeah, not just trying to live.
Okay. I think you would be kind of tough.
I can't make fire.
Yeah, but it's just the psychological manipulation that I'm mostly concerned with. Yeah, I think you'd be pretty up there. Leonard for different reasons. Ben.
Who's the softest?
Pass.
You versus Seth in a 3-set tennis match, who's got the edge?
I actually genuinely don't know, because we've played matches and oftentimes we'd run out of time and it would be deadlock tied. I think it might just be a flip. I would say, if anything, he would have an edge on hard. I would have an edge on clay. But
This is some real cop-out shit.
no, I mean, I think it's just.
I knew when I
true.
wrote the question you were going to do that.
No, I think it's just true.
That's fair. Should online WSOP bracelets be counted the same, thought of similarly, or the same as live WSOP bracelets?
I don't think it matters. There's so many bracelets of all kinds in circulation, and also, what do you mean by counted in terms of?
I mean, they're always like, Phil Ivey, 10 bracelets. Benny Glazer just won 3, 7 bracelets.
Yeah, I don't know. That stuff never mattered to me, so I'm just kind of disconnected from it. I feel like the only people that have a right to make an argument one way or the other are people that actually care about it. And as someone that doesn't, I just, yeah, sure, count them or don't, whatever.
Who's your worst dressed friend on tour?
Isn't it just, nah, you're okay. I was going to say myself, but...
You can't insult the GTO Lab gear. That's terrible.
Pre-GTO
all
Lab
I wear.
gear.
What'd you say?
Pre-GTO Lab gear.
I mean, I just wore this and it didn't say GTO Lab.
Yeah, it's mostly the shorts. It's always like the same gym shorts. But then I do the same thing, so I kind of I nominate myself. Yeah.
You're being a real pussy with these questions.
Not really. I think all of my friends, they kind of dress... Well, there's 2 categories, right? Like, there's the athleisure types, and we all wear the same stuff. It's either like Aloe, Lulu, or, you know, a couple of other brands, and it's all the same stuff. And then there's guys that wear kind of less leisurely type of clothing, so it can't be them just for the amount of effort that's put in.
Fair. 3 of your favorite TV series all time.
The Wire, I think actually
Correct.
just clear number 1. And then, yeah, I want to say, I guess Breaking Bad. And nothing else really comes to mind. Yeah, I think The Wire is just so far ahead of everything else. Just the realism, the storylines, the fact that it's not filmed in a high production way, but it's just so good. And also it's somewhat timeless in a way. And covers many generations too. I think there's just... nothing
That's a
comes close.
component I found is like integral to a good show, is that in between seasons, at least, a lot of time passes, because it's either boring if no time passes and nothing interesting happens, or if a lot of stuff happens without time passing, it just becomes unbelievable really quickly. I feel like you need to age things.
Yeah, and also it's interesting, the kind of the technology generations that the show has progressed through. Just from using burner phones, but then before that, pay phones.
Yeah, I mean, as poker players, we love watching the cat and mouse game as things evolve.
Yeah.
I think it's got a good corollary. Yeah, I once read an article by Chuck Klosterman. I think the article was essentially, there are only 3 correct answers to that question, and they are The Wire, Mad Men, and Breaking Bad. And which order you put those shows in says something about your personality. And I have to agree. I mean, Breaking Bad is for sure 3rd for me. Honestly, I think Better Call Saul was better, but kind of knowing how it has to end up handicaps it, makes things a little more difficult than Breaking Bad. But yeah, those 3 shows are great.
Yeah.
3 of your favorite movies of all time.
Clockwork Orange. I always blank on these questions, and then like a day later, it comes to me. The Clockwork Orange is just such an obvious answer because I've made friends watch it and they were just so confused and concerned and afraid. That's just a very very obvious one for me. This is how bad I am with this stuff. I can picture the other two that I want to say, but I forget what they're called.
Can you describe them at all?
Yes. The first one is the it's one of the Coen brothers movies where they have like the crazy hitman.
Yeah. No Country for Old Men.
Yes. I think that's pretty up there for me. And then I think it's called something Island.
Shutter Island.
Shutter Island, yeah.
All right. We've
Yeah,
got
I'll go with those. I'm sure I'm missing some, but yeah, that's the kind of gist of my favorite movies. How did I just said something Island and you're like Shutter Island?
I mean, you already kind of explained a predilection for a certain type of movie. If it was The Island, I think you wouldn't have thought of it as something Island. So, yeah, it was the first one that came.
Yeah, I thought I would need to describe. It was like, yeah, Leonardo DiCaprio, he was like a mental patient, and then his psychiatrist tricks him, and then it doesn't work.
Yeah, we would have got there too. Final question. A word or phrase to describe King's Casino in Razvadov. Razvadov? Is that how you say it?
Well, it's just King's Casino.
King's Casino.
Yeah, it's just that. Mandatory once.
All right. I heard this quote on another podcast recently, not a poker podcast. I think it was Naval Ravikant on Chris Williamson, I think is the name of the podcast host. I'd never heard him before, but I thought it was really good. He seemed like a great host. But he was quoting James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, and he brought up this quote, "Trajectory is more important than position." I want to hear if you have any thoughts about that.
Just thoughts on the quote in isolation or as it relates to specifically coming from James Clear and things he would have referenced in the book?
I would say the quote in isolation, although not the properties in physics, because I don't think he's arguing that, but maybe then spinning off into areas that you think this audience would care about.
So I'm just trying to kind of, because I've read Atomic Habits actually more than once, I think it's one of those books where after reading it, you think that you haven't really learned anything new or eye-opening, which is true. There's no rocket science in there, but it does give you tangible ways to implement good new habits. And the actual doing is a lot more important than kind of understanding the all of the underlying things. But yeah, to answer the question, as it relates to poker anyway, especially if we zoom out, it's such an evolving ecosystem that we're part of. Poker looked very different 5 years ago, and 5 years before that, even more so. And so things are, players are constantly improving. The environment's always changing. So where you kind of are now in terms of fitting in among everyone else, where you are in the ecosystem, kind of like what tier you're in as a professional, that's going to change very quickly if you just do nothing. And so regardless of where you're starting from, small improvements every day, trending in the right direction every day, if your end goal is to keep getting better and better, it's just going to be a lot more important than where you rank currently.
So
Just because, unless I'm
push back
answering
on
a
that a
different
bit.
question.
No, I like that, and I'm mostly in agreement. But the pushback would be, well, no, my position is what I care about. Incremental improvement sounds nice, but why should I care more about that than my position? Position is going to correlate to income. It's going to correlate to status. Why shouldn't I just choose position as more important?
Because it won't correlate to your income or your status for a very long time. So you would actually be a good example for this, given that you had a fairly recent entry or re-entry, however you want to put it, to playing a quite a relatively high volume of live poker anyway. So if you compared your tournament skill set now to when's the first Triton that you played, like in recent years?
Cyprus 22, 23.
Okay, so if you take
It
that
was
stop, or
September
even
of one of those years.
yeah, if you take that stop or even a stop or two after that, like how would you honestly compare your skill set as it comes to tournaments now compared to then?
Yeah, there's been a lot of progress.
Do you think you were winning in the tournaments that you played then?
I do.
Do you think that if you took that debut and put him into 2025 Triton,
Losing,
right? Not that much time has passed.
Mm-hmm.
So you had to have made progress. And if you remain stagnant, all of your position evaporates to, especially in the high stakes world, to becoming a pretty negative one pretty quickly. So it's just kind of like the question of, would you rather have $1 million that's invested at minus 5% yearly, or would you rather have 500K that's invested at plus 5% yearly or something? And it's kind of like, well, it depends on the time frame, obviously. And with shorter time frames, you'd rather have more money. But my point is that the time frames and the evolution of the ecosystem of everyone else happens very quickly in poker. It seems like it doesn't for the people that are in it because you're part of the process. But if you zoom out and look at what happens every couple of years, everyone gets a lot better very quickly. You might not see it from stop to stop, but if you take increments of 5 stops instead, you see a very different sort of landscape. And so that's why I think, I mean, of course you want your position to be as high as possible, but unless you are constantly improving, it's just going to amount to not having a very good position in a year or two.
Yeah, when you talk about that, what comes to mind for me, two of the most important things in my life as far as activities, it's poker and table tennis. And there's this contrast in both. I can work on either one and watch myself get better. I can play and get better at a much slower rate than if I, let's say, do work, whatever you want to define work as. And I don't think the equation is entirely similar, not just because one provides an income while the other has nothing to do with supporting me. What I mean to say is this: I came home from table tennis like a week ago, and I said to Heather, like, this is kind of sick, but I'm almost a little scared to get much better because I'm at a level right now where I can go to just about any gym in the world and find someone that's still fun for me to play with. And if I increase my level by about 10%, that's not going to be the case anymore. I'm going to have to set up my matches, and I have to set up an appointment with a coach or something to be able to have fun. And obviously I love getting better, and getting better is so kind of integral to enjoying most things. Is you want to, even if the progress is very slow, you want to see yourself progress. But I do think there's diminishing returns, not only diminishing returns, I guess there's another phrase I'm looking for. It can go backwards on you where it can stop being enjoyable. Like where I am in tennis, for example, is very fun. I beat up on all my friends, but it's still fun to play with all my friends. And, we played with David Benefield. I'm not sure how fun it is for him to play with us, for example, but I think if I was his level, I wouldn't enjoy playing with you nearly as much as I do currently, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I played with him as well, and yeah, it did seem cuspy in terms of like border. I feel like I'm like relatively perceptive of people having fun when they're clearly better than you at something.
There's a first time bias too, because if it's your buddy, you just have fun dropping the
Right.
slam on him, but once it's acknowledged, like, hey, you're not going to get a game off me. Like, I don't need to do this 5 times.
Yeah, and so with those things, I feel like it also depends on the person that's better, their approach to kind of executing and trying to improve or work on something, or finding a way to make the game that you're thrown in fun, even if you are a lot better, which is, yeah, a little bit of a separate topic. But I mean, I think you actually strike me as someone that does very well in terms of playing down to someone's level.
Yeah, I can't help it. It's very difficult to keep the killer instinct if you think that you're a lock to win.
Yeah. Well, so how do you balance kind of being a very competitive person that always has this drive to get better at things kind of no matter what, and then also, you're playing someone that you're going to beat, and you are probably subconsciously even just playing down to their level?
I think it's different in terms of what your relationship is with the person. I can remember as a kid and as a teenager, like, there's a level of anger that was attached to competition that's no longer there. Like, I don't want to play anybody in anything that I don't like, because then I can feel like an anger come up in me, and that makes it a difficult equation. So I only play against people that I enjoy. Like, I actively, the few people who are like real assholes at table tennis, I mostly just try to avoid them. And, with tennis, I'm playing all against friends. What motivates me against friends is that we're all competitive people, and every once in a while, someone will make a comment like, I don't know if it was you, Brian, or Seth, or who, but probably all of you at some point told me like within a year you'd be beating me. So that's enough to kind of motivate me to make sure that doesn't happen. But I think that I'm someone who progresses way slower than I could. I don't know if it's intentional or, kind of subconscious, but because I really enjoy the flow of, in racket sports in particular, there's a cooperative, aspect to it. Like, if you just suck on the other side of the net, I'm not enjoying myself, even though I'm winning points. So
Right.
Especially if my opponent is playing bad, I will try to get them in rhythm. And that's obviously sacrificing, competitive advantage. But if they're in good enough rhythm and I feel threatened, I will do everything I can to break the rhythm within the means of, not being an asshole.
Yeah, so I think with things like that, it's also, you kind of mentioned what being competitive feels like, or where it stems from, kind of changing from, really anger oriented when you're a kid or even a teenager, or a less developed, like young adult. And then, yeah, you get older, and I think you realize that really the competition with a lot of these things is kind of with yourself and with kind of, yeah, self-improvement, incremental gains, etc. But you're not really competing against the other person, even though you are. It's more you're competing with yourself and your previous self in a way. And so the cooperative aspect of it actually makes a lot of sense to me in that perspective, because if you're mostly competing with yourself, looking for a way to improve during a match where you're going to win anyway, it makes total sense that the equilibrium is that you hit balls that they're still going to return. It lessens your EV, but then it gives you a chance to actually work on something within that game as well. Maybe your footwork, maybe whatever else that you wouldn't have otherwise if you were just trying to crush them. So I wouldn't even say that it's necessarily being less competitive if you're doing that. You're just being more, potentially actually creating more competition for competing versus yourself, if that makes sense. And I think that there's kind of always ways like that almost sound like borderline tricking yourself, which are kind of just a net positive for everyone involved.
Yeah, spinning it back to poker, this I think is one of the hidden benefits, beauties of poker is you can work on the game as much as you want to. And if you want to work really hard and you have too much time on your hands, which I've felt I've had at various points in my life, you can just devote yourself, and there's infinite work to be had at all hours of the day. You don't need to, there's not crazy resources. You don't need a gym or whatnot. And if you want to work very little on your game and back burner it for 6 months, you can come back and there's some work you need to catch up, but it's very catch upable, if you will, relative to, when I think about pro athletes, like they can't just take a year off and come back. It's very difficult. They have to work super, super hard, even if they're not recovering from an injury, unless they're really young.
Yeah, I think the big difference between athletes and sports and poker, in the sense of staying at the top of your game and being good relative to competition, is that if I don't do any poker work for a year, when I come back in a year, I will still be the poker player that I was a year ago, more or less. Everyone else would have improved, but I didn't get worse. Right. And that's, I think, a giant thing that distinguishes poker from sports, where if I'm a professional athlete and I took a year off, I am not forget about everyone else getting better. I'm just nowhere near close to the player that I was a year ago if I hadn't played for a year. There's a bunch of regression that happens. In poker, there's not that much regression. It's just everyone else has sort of improved, but at least you haven't gotten worse. For sports, you just get way, way worse. And so that's why with poker, it's kind of easier to come back in a way, because you didn't lose anything.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned something a little earlier about, I can't remember the exact context, but you were saying you just do it. And it made me think of a lot of people in my life, a lot of people that you meet through poker are fantastic thinkers. And that doesn't necessarily translate to action and to doing things. And even away from your ability to focus on the table and get yourself to study, be a coach, whatever other hard things you do that are work related, you're a doer off the table. You are, an outdoorsman. let's flash a few Instagram pictures now, but you have numerous hobbies between sports and outdoor activities, going on marathon hikes. You're a runner. How do you get yourself to do things? I know that's a, kind of basic question, but when I have this bias towards thinking of people who are very cerebral as almost people who are not men of action. And you very much are a doer. I'm sure some of it's natural, but do you have any tips, advice to people who I might classify as overthinkers?
So I think my drive to do things is partially for sure just kind of natural. I'm just someone that can't sit still, like even in the broad sense of the term. But when it comes to just executing and doing things, I think it's important to realize that a lot of things are actually that we think of are high skill actually have very low skill components to them. And the low skill components, you can just decide to do them. Like you literally just need to decide to do them and do them. It doesn't take a lot of reps or high skill to actually execute them. So to give a poker example, right? If we're looking at improving performing under pressure, something like let's say you're someone that just gets really nervous, your mind goes blank when you're in a big hand on a stream table or deep in the tournament and you just can't think. Tackling that overall, that's a very high skill thing. It's a soft skill in a sense, but it's a high skill thing. I can't just tell you to be not nervous and to just think clearly when your heart rate's through the roof and you're anxious and your primal brain overrides any logical thought. I can't just tell you to do that. But you can decide to go for a run right now, or go lift weights at the gym, or do whatever else, or
let me push back for a minute.
Yeah.
So my theory is when that happens and someone says, yeah, run right now would be really good for me. There's this rationalizing voice that comes in and starts to argue why it's not really worth it or why I should do something else instead. But it's always, in my experience, some form of rationalization to excuse yourself from doing the quote hard thing. Do you not have that voice, or are you consistently calming it? What's going on there?
Oh no, I have that voice all the time, and it's
You just say fuck off, pussy.
I mean, or yeah, pretty much, right? Or depending on what it is I'm trying to do, it'll be a version of that. And don't get me wrong, I'm super avoidant with a bunch of other very
Responding
simple
to text
things.
messages.
Responding to text messages, especially from you, stuff like you gotta call the bank or figure something out. I'll just put that off endlessly, and that is also a thing that I could just decide to do. But you also have to think about if the thing that's hard is actually in line with your goals or not. So I'm avoidant with a bunch of things, but they don't actually align with goals that I've set in, I guess, like a more mindful, backed off sort of state. And that's an important distinction. But if you've had time to think about like what your fitness or poker goals or whatever other life goals are, and you were mindful, you were calm, you've thought about it for maybe a week or two, you've kind of set those goals, you can't just be dismissing and avoiding simple tasks that lead you towards that goal.
So it's not about just especially like if you ask my wife, I'm probably one of the most avoidant people when it comes to doing very simple things such as calling things and doing stuff around the house. It doesn't really correlate to things that are kind of long-term goals that much with me, so I kind of think that's okay. But not giving it your all when you're playing poker and paying attention to everything, being a great poker player has always been at the forefront of and like one of my biggest goals. So I just find it would be unacceptable to cut corners when it comes to doing anything poker related. And I feel like that's the difference.
Do you think then that it's necessary to have some relatively static goals in your life? Is there any way around that method that you can see?
Well, what do you mean by static goals?
Semi-static, like they have to remain in place for 3 months or 6 months, but they're not negotiable every time you're in the gym and deciding whether or not to do one more rep.
I think over time, it's actually the more global goal is to get yourself to a mental state where you don't even question, giving it one more rep or pushing yourself to the max. It's that just becomes your default. Maybe not all the time, but at least at a very high frequency. I think the goal should just be for that to become somewhat automatic.
Yeah. So speaking from my own experience, if you put a ball in front of me, that's very easy. Chasing down a tennis ball, for example, it is just my natural move to not I'll play. Here's the flip side. The flip side would be like someone in my shoes saying, buddy, you're 38, giving it your all, and, practically laying out on a fucking hard court is a really stupid move. Long term, this is not good for your longevity playing tennis. This is not good for you as a father, having a body that will be able to last, through his teen years or whatnot, and be able to play with your child. All these reasons you could rationalize not giving it your all for a ball. But for me, it's relatively easy. I stay very narrow focused. I say, I want to get this ball. If I have 5% chance, I'm going to give it everything I can. But I have plenty of respect and empathy for that other viewpoint, and that other viewpoint is me in a different situation. It's why I can't go for a run. I despise going for a run because after about 2 minutes, it's a constant battle between this rationalizing voice of, this is not fun, you hate this, go back, it's not that important. Do you really need to, get the endorphins this way? You don't need to lose weight. What's happening? Why are you doing this?
Yeah, so, a few thoughts on that. I would say this. I think, generally speaking, like 95, maybe 99+% of people have a really wrong perception of what giving it your all actually is. And I think that when a lot of people say like, oh, you gotta like try your hardest or give it your all, they're nowhere near close to actually pushing themselves as hard as they could. So, if you're going for a run and you're like, oh, it was hot today and I was kind of tired given everything, I tried my best. And it's like, did you like,
did you vomit?
Yeah. Did you throw up at the end? Like, were you so dizzy and disoriented from pushing yourself so hard that you just tripped over your leg and face planted? Like, did any of those things happen? Like, did you have to go to the hospital and get hooked up to an IV? So obviously you don't actually want to be doing any of those things, at least on a consistent basis. But until that, some version of that happens, you actually don't know what your threshold is. And my point is that like your threshold is actually probably very far away from what you think. You're kind of like, yeah, this was, I tried pretty hard. I gave it like max effort. It's like, you probably didn't. So should you go for max effort every time? No, absolutely not. That's ridiculous. Yes, you'll injure yourself. It's not even a good way to make progress. But having a well-defined idea of what that max actually is and how close you are
can only come from actually getting to that max at least sometimes. And I think most people go through life not getting to the max of anything for years at a time. And I think there has to be at least something. It doesn't have to be physical. It can be straining mental work. It can be physical, but there has to be something where you actually get to the max every now and then.
Yeah.
Tournament Savagery is 25 hours of structured tournament strategy by Nick Petrangelo and Daniel Dvoress. This course covers pre-bubble, bubble, in the money, and the final table broken down like never before. We also cover post-flop ICM, blind versus blind, and much more. Buy now for $9.99 only at GTOLab.com.
So we talked earlier a bit about, the fact that you have all these outdoors hobbies, and as someone who, it's funny because kind of growing up, I was told I was a very competitive person. And in the same way that being told that I was a very analytical person, it just meant nothing to me. I was just like, what would the alternative be? I guess other people are just like lying is kind of how I assumed it was. When they would be like, while I'm playing Monopoly, I'm thinking about the prices of things. I'm just like, what else would you be thinking about? But it took me a while to realize that like I derive so much of my enjoyment of activities from competition, and I desperately wanted to get away from that somewhat, if for no other reason than kind of to give my brain some reprieve from the intensity of competition. And I found I really liked something that I hated as a kid, which is hiking. And I relate that to you as someone who does a lot of outdoor activities, many of them solo, and there's no escaping, status games. There's still, you're deriving some egoic pleasure at some level from those things, but I think it's quite different from competing directly with somebody, having somebody on the other side of the tennis court as our easy example. So I'm curious about your relationship with those things. If you find that there's, as I'm putting it, some reprieve from competition when you're doing them, if, basically contrasting the pleasure that you get from going on a kayaking and hiking trip on your own and cooking your own meals to, playing a buddy in tennis.
So there's several distinct things that make those activities really enjoyable for me. The first one is that I find any outdoor activity automatically meditative. Mm-hmm. I'm someone that goes through spurts of kind of regular, I guess what you would call normal meditation, where, you're meditating 10 to 30 minutes daily in the regular sense of the word. And I find that very useful and during certain times of my life necessary, but it's also extremely hard. It takes a lot of effort, as most mindful meditation should, but it's doing that in the traditional sense is very hard for me. Going for a solo canoe trip, it automatically gets me into that state for an extended period of time at a lower effort. So there's that part of it. The other completely separate part to it is that I think that pursuing some discomfort, it's something that I find necessary for myself. We've had conversations about this and how you think that's insane and you're not like this at all. But
I wouldn't say not like this at all.
with certain things,
yeah.
you're like that, but not with like getting eaten alive by mosquitoes or
oh yeah, fuck that, that's insane.
yeah, or it's very cold or wet or whatever, or this backpack's very heavy and I still gotta carry it.
Yeah.
So I think pursuing situations where you're just uncomfortable and you really can't do anything about it, I think there is a lot of value to that, both in terms of being able to push your own limits, but also just in the practical sense of making
other real regular life a lot easier and a lot stress-free. But I think when you have this anchor of having been very uncomfortable because you were solo hiking through somewhere with a bunch of bugs and it was cold for a week, and then you're, in a crowded airport and people are yelling everywhere, and you're just kind of like, yeah.
You think this is why people have children? They're just subconsciously
they just want to anchor themselves to be uncomfortable.
I understand having a kid, but when I see somebody with like 3 kids, I'm just like, oh, you must like cold plunges and really hot saunas.
This is your version of a cold plunge, right?
Well,
so there's that separate aspect of it. And then there's also a third aspect, which is very open-ended problem solving, where constantly, especially if you're doing stuff in remote outdoors, constantly problems come up which are new. You're not even sure if there is a solution. And it's very different from studying poker or even getting better at a sport where there's a clear system that's in place, and in order to improve something or to plug a leak in the poker sense, it's pretty clear what you need to work on and how you would go about it. But
that's where I find you very unique, is like you said, it's very different from poker. And I think so many people attracted to poker like this logical A to B problem solving, and open-ended problems tend to cause more angst and maybe not the kind of stress they're desiring. And I don't know, I kind of prefer, I like the chaos more often, but you strike me as a person who both likes not having an instruction manual and also likes reading the instruction manual when an instruction manual is there. And that, I think, is kind of what makes you unique. Because I mean, we're not saying people who enjoy the outdoors or, trying to figure out how I'm going to find and cook my dinner tonight are rare. They're just rare in the poker world, I feel like.
Yeah, I think maybe a little bit. So that's actually a very good observation, because I am very much a read the instruction manual in certain situations sort of approach. But then I'm also go off script very often. And so I think the really big distinction with those two polar opposites is, if you are trying to do something or to either to fix something or set something up or whatever that was built and planned by other humans with unknown intentions or processes in place, you really should read the instruction manual. So like an example of that would be, if you're putting together a piece of like IKEA furniture, read the instruction manual. Like, there's just like even if you are someone that is very handy or, does a lot of crafts, has worked in construction, you're not going to be much better at putting together, physically you're going to be better at putting together an IKEA shelf, but in terms of figuring out which dowels go into which holes in which order, read the instruction manual.
So let me take that to the poker sphere, because when you mention that, the first thing that comes to mind for me is that there's incredibly low downside to reading the instruction manual. Outside of the time spent reading it, it's very tough for me to see why that would harm your process, even if you have some bizarre reason and somehow there is a better way to assemble the furniture than IKEA suggested. At least having that starting place seems helpful. Whereas in poker, let me kind of explain my line of thinking here. Stevie mentioned it when he was on the podcast. I can't remember his exact phrasing, but we like a lot of the same content around philosophy and cognition and psychology. And he's been spending a lot of time whenever he hears something, whether it's positive or negative, trying to imagine the inverse. And essentially he finds that's bringing him closer to the middle. So I find that a very useful and also just pleasurable experience when I hear about a positive trait, just thinking what could the downsides be of that positive trait. With regard to this instruction manual example, I'm thinking about a player who is really good at studying in terms of memorizing charts. And the downside to me, sorry, this is getting long-winded. In a Ted Chiang story, The Truth of Fact, The Truth of Fiction, he mentions a guy who had the world's best memory. I think it was a Russian guy in, say, the 30s. And he had a very difficult life because his ability to recall almost everything in every passage he ever wrote made abstraction very difficult for him.
Mhm.
And I see that in a micro sense in poker, people who start their poker journey with a lot of studying and not a lot of experience playing real opponents, they can have trouble abstracting what they've learned and applying it, in this realistic sense, essentially tinkering with the charts that they've memorized and trying to reorient to how their opponent is actually playing. Does that resonate at all? Do you see any issue with maybe having a great memory being somewhat harmful in poker?
For sure. Well, let me qualify that. Studying a lot, really remembering how spots work at equilibrium, how the computer plays various spots. If it's going to be mindful and controlled, which I'll get to shortly, yeah, it's always just going to be a positive. It's better to know more things. However, what I see in practice quite often is that, especially for people that are really well studied, that are very structured and have a very structured approach to how poker is played and should be played, what often happens is if they get put into a situation where, let's say their opponent does something that they're not supposed to do, right? Let's say I open cutoff, you defend the big blind, it comes king 6-6, and I just bet 80% pot or something. What I see quite often is among the people that have a very structured approach, that seeing that just produces such a high anxiety response that they can't even think of what sort of adjustment they should be doing or what strategy they should be using, both because they've only studied the thing that's kind of like supposed to happen, which is not this node that we're in, but also because even if they're trying to make sense of the spot now, it just irks them so badly that this person did something they're not supposed to do, that they just have so much anxiety that there's just, it's all blank up here, yeah. And they're not really actively thinking. So that's the downside. Which is why I think that it's important to approach things from kind of like two different directions at the same time.
So with regard to two different directions at the same time, you and I both do a lot of private coaching, and one of the things you learn, and you kind of already mentioned having a diverse cast of students, and why you kind of curate that on purpose. But I find that the fun challenge is when a student needs to just memorize something and then we can talk about adjustments. I think pre-flop opening ranges is just pretty simple, where you're not going to go super far off chart most of the time. And that just needs to be memorized. And then when you need to do a lot of pausing to start to integrate what different villains will look like, what their player pool actually is doing. So maybe by the time you reach the flop check raise node, maybe that is an early enough spot where we need to run some interruption and talk about, hey, wait a minute, look at these check raises. Tell me what sticks out as something you don't really expect your opponents to be using. And now we need to start talking about real world application and pause. It doesn't mean we can't learn equilibrium. We still have to, but that this is where you're going to need your poker sense and more of a conversation and less memorizing.
Yeah, I think it's important to define how sensitive various decisions are to you being wrong. And I think that, so for example, when it comes to pre-flop ranges, because they are so clear in some sense, a 50 big blind deep, you can open king 7 off from the button, but not king 4 off. Like there is like just a very clear thing there. Or, you can open queen 5 or queen 6 suited from hijack, but not queen 3 suited, let's say, in some full ante format. So because we're kind of used to seeing these rigid charts, it's easy to think that this is clearly where the line is, and that there's somehow this important difference between king 7 and king 4. And I think that it's important to define how being wrong is actually like on a continuum. And so with preflop ranges, if you just generally have the right idea, but if you're a couple of pips off, I'm kind of, especially with players that play mostly recreationally, I'm kind of like, maybe brush up on this, but whatever. But then you get to this post-flop node, and this is where, if your opponent is just not check raising the bluffs even only half of the time that they're supposed to, your response should just look wildly different with most of your continues. And so that's where the sensitivity in terms of you deciding one way or the other against the possible, I guess, mini universes of different opponent strategies that you can be in, that's where it's very sensitive to which universe you are in. Opening a couple of pips lower from any position, it'll be a little bit better to open loose if your opponents are playing too tight. It'll be a little bit worse to open loose if they're 3-betting too much. Sure, but there's no sensitivity there. It's all this like kind of gradual scale that's on a continuum, unlike the spot that you mentioned.
Yeah, I think the other thing that makes things really tricky is that pre-flop and flop poker, there's still so much of the hand left to unspool that you can make a very accurate point. I think the classic one I like to hammer on is, my opponent doesn't check raise enough from the big blind, therefore I should over c-bet. And it might be that you should over c-bet. That sounds like a good point, but what does the check back line look like? What are they doing wrong against that? And are they struggling more against big bet or small bet or tiny bet on the flop? It's not so simple, because in the end, you're always going to be producing more EV against a human than, again, not always, but a computer is doing everything perfectly. So if you are to c-bet too frequently because they don't check raise enough, yes, you'll produce more EV, but the check back line may produce even more EV, and it's difficult to know that.
Yeah, so earlier we were talking about how I'm kind of a proponent of mixing, even if you think that in a vacuum something is better, specifically for this exact reason. Like, let's say you're up against the big blind that doesn't check raise enough, and you're in some spot where it's a high frequency but not pure c-bet board, where you're supposed to be betting 70 or 80% of the time, but you're kind of going, this guy's weak passive, I'm just going to c-bet range, it'll go well for me. And that is true, but then you literally never explore these other nodes, which might, if you forced yourself to occasionally check back the flop, after a few iterations, you might kind of go, this was kind of silly, I should have just c-bet. But what will actually often happen is the turn is something, and then a light bulb goes off, and you're kind of like, oh my God, this delayed c-bet bluff is now so profitable, because once they check twice, I just know that they're always folding. Or they bet some small amount, and you're kind of going, oh my God, I have second pair, and against this bet size, I know for sure it's the best hand, and I can actually raise here. Like, there's so many different things that can happen that just make a light bulb go off and kind of go like, this is a sweet node to be in. And then unless you're actively forcing yourself to get to those nodes, you'll just never know. You'll just kind of be doing the in a vacuum exploit over and over.
Yeah, I mean, you're using the exact words to talk about a concept from computer science that's like one of my favorites. Alison Gopnik, this psychologist, has been hired by some of the big AI firms to discuss the explore exploit trade-off in terms of helping figure out how AIs will learn the best. And yeah, you're talking about the benefits of exploring these different lines, and that's something that toddlers and young children are doing constantly. That's why they touch and smell and, taste everything as they're exploring the world. It's not optimal to put a tennis ball in your mouth, but you have to try it once to find that out. And I mean, unless you're a dog, then it's fantastic. But all this exploration is so important. And in poker, I think, especially when you attach the word optimize to things, it pushes us in an exploit direction so quickly. And I don't mean, and I don't think you mean exploitative poker necessarily, just finding the best strategy necessarily. And there's this safety in kind of coming to a decision. I will play B33 on these flops all the time. And you can kind of get comfortable with that, especially not even necessarily trying to exploit your opponents as to be unexploitable, which is something that is maybe too much a badge of honor in poker. And obviously the other direction, you can go way too far. We don't have toddlers running the world. We kind of do have some toddlers running the world. But we don't want, people who are just exploring constantly in positions of power, making big decisions for us. And just the same, I don't think you want to enter, tournaments that are important to you or play cash for stakes that are important to you and just keep trying out new bet sizes every single day. But I do think it's interesting, that balance of trying to kind of be in the sandbox, try out some different strategies, see how people react to them, and then try to see what you might integrate. And I feel like you see that from a lot of the best players in the game who have enough confidence in their technical skills to make what may appear to be technical EV mistakes or blunders to other players in the name of some sort of exploration that they feel like will produce even more EV.
Yeah, I think someone that kind of flies under the radar that I think does this is, because he's just technically so incredible, is Chidwick. Like, he's actually pretty explory, especially sometimes. I think he goes through spurts, but he's someone that's kind of regarded as just always trying to do like the right thing. And I think that it's actually overlooked. He's actually quite comfortable doing a thing that he considers to maybe be the wrong thing, but let's see what happens. And there's a time and place for everything. Like you said, there is a cost to exploring, of course, but I think that there's a lot more reasons or excuses to not explore, and also just the way that most poker players are wired that pushes us away from that direction. Because there's always an excuse of like, well, this is pretty deep in the tournament, so I don't want to be messing around here. I just want to be doing the in a vacuum exploits as much as I can. Or this is pretty high stakes, or there's someone I respect watching my game right now and they might buy action in the future, so I'm just going to do the standard thing. There's just a million excuses to try and exploit only, and then you really have to force yourself to try and exploit, try and explore.
I think that external pressure you mentioned about, even if they're not necessarily selling action, most people have some swaps out there, and maybe some of those swaps aren't people that they've had a completely, very long poker relationship with. So they think of it as, somewhat tenuous, but yeah, how they're perceived. I think, even when some of these go well, people will still sometimes chalk it up, or maybe 80-90% of people will chalk it up to you just didn't know what you were doing and it worked out for you. But then there's that internal pressure of accountability, which is when something doesn't go right, but the solver is going to give you, the double check mark and say, sure, that worked. Then I think a lot of people can at least go on with their day a lot easier, and it hangs with most people a lot more. I mean, I can tell you for me personally, if I do something that I knew was not solver approved, and I went for it, and it was a colossal fail. That's going to stick with me much longer and be much more painful than something that I know was the standard play that 9 out of 10 people would have done and doesn't go well. So be it.
Yeah, dangerous slippery slope, kind of giving yourself pats on the back from the solver check marks for sure.
Yeah. How do you feel about the ethics of playing poker for a living? Maybe you can speak about your own career rather than broadly.
Well, it's complicated, and it's one of those things where once you go down the philosophical aspect of it, it can get so abstract where you're asking, is doing anything really not self-serving and selfish in some ways, and who is it helping, and etc.
I hate these fucking social workers and these AmeriCorps volunteers,
These social
stupid
workers,
ass Peace
they
Corps.
just enable people being lazy, and they're net negative for society, right? It's
Doctors, as long as you know there's people out there who are going to fix you up, you'll do stupid things and get hurt.
Well, it's also, doctors, if there were no doctors, people would eat healthier and take care of themselves because they know there's no hospital to go to.
Thank you, these selfish pricks.
So, of course, if you get really abstract, you could make all of these crazy arguments.
As we always do when we're trying to escape something.
Yes. As I am maybe doing now. So I think that I've come to terms with, I think in some ways, without getting too philosophical or too abstract, pretty much anything you do within, or it's pretty much anything that I would be able to do for a living, given my abilities, would be in some ways kind of selfish and self-serving. And I just don't think that poker is that much of an outlier in that direction. Is it helping society in the grand scheme of things? Probably not. I think that's kind of okay. I do think that there is, if you just play poker only, there is a little bit of a void that needs to be filled in terms of doing something that's empathetic or helping other people. And I find that can be helped with coaching, with GTO Lab stuff, with other things that involve actually letting other people progress and become better. Of course, you are helping them progress and become better at this thing that is
Zero sum.
Maybe not a net positive. But I just kind of think that's fine. Yeah, I guess maybe you were expecting some deeper thoughts than that, but I think that's all I got.
No, I mean, we're in similar camps. I don't think all that many people are doing super net positive things. Some are, I do. I think I don't agree that anything you would be doing would be similar. I think that most of the people in high stakes poker have a skill set in their brain where they could be doing some very helpful things. And I struggle with that to some degree, but I kind of, along the lines of something Dan Smith and I talked about, I kind of search for offsets. But most of them I don't believe they're more to make me feel good than big impact things. So like coaching is an easy example. Like no part of me believes philosophically that I'm doing some big net good there. But it's very gratifying and it feels tangential to benevolence.
Yeah, to be clear, when I said that poker is kind of average or similar to other things I would be doing, I more meant on the scale or the continuum of kind of how beneficial to how non-beneficial to society.
Like if you got into finance, you're saying.
Right, yeah.
Like, I agree with that.
If I was just in finance, that would probably be net worse.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think many people like if Jamie Dimon's on a podcast, I don't think people are asking him like, do you feel like it's ethical what you're doing or whatever? And whereas people probably find it a very reasonable question for me to ask you, for example, or at least non-poker people, I think would kind of expect it's almost like mandatory. Like, hey, Dan doesn't seem like a criminal. Why is he doing this for a living? But yeah.
Yeah, and I think if I went into biology, let's say, which in my late teens is something I considered quite seriously. Yes, doing something within that field could have been more net beneficial, but also even fields like that, I think there is a lot of nuance in terms of who you end up working for, what the real incentives are, and
Sure.
if you end up pursuing side incentives that aren't your initial incentive. I will add this though, when it comes to poker, one of the things that I really enjoy about poker is that there's no layer or mask of like pretending to be the good guys like there are in other fields. Like in finance, for example.
Yeah, acting like things are positive sum when they're not.
Yeah, and just acting like you have this crucial or essential or whatever role, or you
Yeah,
provide
yeah.
a service when really your goal is to be as
I
exploitative
create
as
jobs.
possible.
I'm building companies. And no.
Right.
Yeah, very
And with
often not.
poker, it's kind of like, yeah, the goal of the game is to exploit your opponent to the max. Everyone that plays does so voluntarily, wants to play, and plays on the same playing field. And I think that's what makes poker special.
I love that aspect of it, and especially tournament poker. The fact that everyone knows that I am trying to maximize my EV against you, and win your money is just so nice, and I find so uncomfortable in the business world where it fluctuates. Like in one conversation with a person, you might be having one negotiation that is positive sum, one that's 80% positive sum, 20% zero sum, and then you're flipping into some mode that is entirely one person trying to take advantage of the other, and you don't know. You're just like, oh, you invited me to dinner, that's lovely. And it's just so uncomfortable, I find, coming from the world of poker where we are so straightforward about our intentions. It's just built into the rules.
The only reason I like to get coffee with you in the morning is because when you're sleepy, if I hit you with some reads-based questions, you actually give some stuff away.
Pretty
That's the
open
only
book.
reason. And then once we're done with the morning coffee, I just spill it on you.
That's true. You're usually too tired to synthesize anything for the first cup. Dan has like 3 cold brews within the first 20, 30 minutes of waking up, or at least stumbling down to the
But then
buffet.
after that, I'm done for the day. No more caffeine.
That's true. I mean, in fairness, Dan then rockets off to tennis, and then as we finish our set, he's off in the ocean spearfishing and on to the next thing, and then he has a final table at 12.
Yeah, 2.
No. 2. Fair. We're going to play another game. Over-under. So you're setting the over-under here for yourself, I suppose.
Okay.
Number of fish you've caught in your life.
3,000.
Number of players who have cashed for more than $20 million in live tournaments who are net negative on their buy-ins. So it has nothing to do with swaps and sales, has nothing to do with expenses, just net negative on their buy-ins.
I am so awful at this because I think I would be so off on how many people even have 20 million in cash.
I'm going to guess. I don't feel like looking it up. I'm going to guess there's something like 100.
Okay, we're in the same ballpark. I would have guessed high double digits.
Yeah, I would say about 100. Let's go with 100. The top 100 people, whatever it is, whatever it amounts to.
20 million's an interesting line. It's interesting because it's past where you would get an influx of people that don't play that much, have one really big score, and then are just net positive. It almost certainly involves playing high rollers for some amount of time.
Yeah, like it's possible, like Espen's main event one was probably 10 million, right? It's possible he hasn't crossed 20.
I would guess he has by now, but it's hard to say. Like I don't keep up on the Hendon stuff at all. But yeah, I would set the over under at 27.
27%.
No, 27 people. Because I think the number of 20 million plus players is below 100. I'm thinking maybe about.
Oh, I had a good guess. Espen's at 18.5.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That tracks. Yeah. So I would guess a slightly higher percentage than 27, but not by a lot. Something like a third of the people.
Number of years remaining in which poker or very poker related, we'll say GTO Lab, is your primary source of income.
Well, what if I just have no income?
If you just step away for 3 years and just go Danny off the grid, that ends it. Like that would count as time is up. But if it's like a 1 year hiatus, that doesn't count.
7.
Number of players who have never played a Triton who would currently have a 4 ROI or higher in a 50K Triton. We'll just say at the next stop, the next Jeju, in the 50K, you think they would have positive 4 or higher in a 50K non-turbo.
I think it's actually just 0. I think that there's just not that many people with over 4% to begin with, even when you count the players that really specialize in Triton fields. And even if you are almost technically as good as all of those players, the lack of experience in the Triton fields, as well as just reps playing on stream, playing under a lot of pressure, etc., would surely just make you not hit that, what I consider to be not the highest attainable ROI, but kind of just the tier right under it. I'm going to say 0.
You're spearfishing in Fort Lauderdale tomorrow. How long could you hold your breath?
How long could I, or how long would I?
Good. Like you're trying, life depends on it, longest possible, but you're also actively hunting fish.
If I went tomorrow, I think maybe a couple of minutes, but I would voluntarily surface after about a minute and 15. Maybe a minute 20. I really don't mess around with. I leave myself like quite a buffer. Blocking out when you're in the water isn't a good thing to do.
Have you ever blacked out?
No, not while I'm in the water. No.
No.
While doing breath holding outside of the water, I've gotten pretty fuzzy, but blocking out when you're coming up from being deep is kind of an entirely different thing, which is why you want to leave a buffer.
What are you looking for when you're watching a stream? How can somebody be most effective if they have all of their attention to devote? And how might you alter those suggestions if they're multitasking and they have approximately half of their attention to devote?
So I'd say if you're multitasking and watching a stream, I would say don't, with the exception of if it's a stream that you wouldn't watch unless you were doing something else anyway. So that's where there has to be a clear distinction. If it's some stream that you're never going to get to, but you're making dinner or cleaning and it's just like in the background on the living room TV and you catch a glimpse here and there, fine. Whatever, it doesn't matter. I don't think you're getting too much from it, but maybe you'll see something that's a very big outlier and you'll kind of pause and look and pay attention. It could either be that, or if it's a stream that you're going to watch and learn from, I think it's just a disservice to do other things other than watching the stream. And I think that generally you're kind of looking for things in one of two distinct categories. You're either looking for general technical tendencies, so you'll need a lot of kind of repeats for the same players and kind of taking general notes,
or you're looking for specific reads. And depending on which of those you are looking for, and I would look at them separately, the way that you watch the stream is a little bit different. But I'm almost never just watching a stream as it is. I'm kind of just using the back and forth keys and flicking through frames. And then if I'm looking for specific reads, then I'll watch segments of particular players. If I'm looking through tendencies, then just flicking through the stream as quickly as possible and kind of compiling data is, I think, the most efficient way to do it.
When you say compiling data, do you mean an Excel sheet or?
No, I like to do kind of softer sort of tendency notes. Like kind of the first few times someone makes a light 3-bet, which is kind of, maybe not somewhere between not mandatory to maybe like clearly exploitative, I would take like a light note, and then if it repeats again, then the heaviness of that note would increase. Just kind of like an exclamation mark, and that's it. I don't think that everyone's different, but just the way I learn is I identify a particular trend, and then I try to get a feel for the intensity of that trend within that person, and I'll take a note of that rather than having like a spreadsheet of how many times they did what, though of course that might work better for someone else.
How often would you say timing or facial expression or hand movement, any kind of other physical tell, makes its way onto one of those notes?
Not as often as I would like. Yeah, maybe 20 to 25% of the time.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever give up on searching for timing or physical tells with a player you've just played with for long enough and you feel like this person just a secure enough player that
Yes.
I can kind of not read much into it?
Yes. I think that is one of the most useful things that you can do. And actually, I won't mention any names, although it's not just, I kind of don't want to, not because it's particularly a secret, because I've actually talked to these players about this exact thing, even though it's about them. There's several players that I find to actually be quite expressive, but it is, at least for me, of course, the way you vibe with someone could impact this, or the way you perceive things. But at least for me, it is very hard to correlate their behaviors or expression to anything specific. And when it's so convoluted and this sort of, like you use the term whirlpool, and that actually really fits this as well, when their thoughts are so nuanced and you don't know what causes them anxiety or stress or comfort, and they are thinking about so many things and also quite expressive at the same time, but you don't know what the expression correlates to because they have so many thoughts going on at the same time. The worst thing that you could do is draw false conclusions. Mm-hmm. And so as I've identified players like that, I've just kind of decided the best thing to do is to not pursue this and spend the energy elsewhere.
Introducing the GTO Lab ICM Trainer. Train all positions at once. The new and better way of learning poker tournaments. Master all stages of the tournament. Pre-bubble, bubble, in the money, 2 and 3 tables left, and the final table. Learn how to crush tournaments from our coaches and get the most out of the trainer. We have the biggest ICM library ever, with over 14,000 solutions created by Nick Petrangelo and Daniel Dvoress. Join GTO Lab today and stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I think that last part about spend energy elsewhere gets lost in the mix sometimes, because if you do feel like you have a concrete live tell on someone, even if it's, especially a physical tell, even more so than a timing tell, and especially if you're playing in a time bank tournament, it's pretty rare if you spend 20 seconds, analyzing this, thinking back on when you saw it, trying to fit it into this actual situation and what it represents on the turn. Your process is getting hijacked, and you have, often if you're bothering to kind of go down that road, you probably have a somewhat complex decision. And so there is a cost, essentially, if you have any kind of decision to begin with. And I can tell you that, some of the hands where I feel the worst about them afterwards are when I feel like I went with a live read, it didn't work great, but what it really came down to was like, I didn't realize how strongly I needed to be sure of whatever this read was in order to go down this direction, because the EV loss, if there was no read, is so egregious that, maybe I should have just played it safe and done my process.
Yeah, and so that you're actually talking about a cost that I wasn't even thinking of when I said, there's kind of a spend your energy elsewhere. So you're talking about the actual decision point in the future hand where you're implementing a read or the lack thereof, or this kind of shitty read that you have on someone. And there is certainly that cost, because if you're spending 25 seconds out of your 30 trying to think about what someone's eyebrow did during XYZ spot, you're not even thinking about what the proper bet size is theoretically for this spot. There is that loss of EV, but I was even talking about if someone is really difficult to get a hold of in terms of getting a read on them, pick someone else. Yeah, there's like 100 unique players. You're not going to go through all of them. If someone's giving you difficulty, move on to someone else that you play a lot with. And that's kind of what I meant by spend your energy elsewhere. You want to devote time to gaining live reads, fine, but at least get the low-hanging fruit first.
Yeah, I tend to be very suspicious if I hear about a physical read on a player who's been playing for a long time, just because if it's out there, wouldn't we see a bunch of people just crushing them in certain situations, at least on the streamed hands? Wouldn't there be some crazy exploitative calls and folds? And it's like, I don't know. I've seen this guy been playing for 5 years and he does okay. He's like a bad player already and he doesn't do the absolute worst. So, sometimes there's just like, there's enough data around the edges that contradicts what I think a lot of people want to say, that they've got a magical tell. Not to say like, new things pop up all the time. So someone for 4 years might have been secure in one area and then something, pops up. But I don't think that's generally the case.
Yeah. And like you were saying earlier on how information travels, that was in the context of players not ever check raising, kind of borderline value hand. And how that can cost you EV down the line in ways that you might not even know. Information also travels with regards to people have friends that tell them that other people have reads on them. It's a constantly evolving thing. And especially if people are talking openly about having reads on other players, chances are that everyone's like 1 or 2 degrees of separations away from each other in the high roller community. So chances are it'll get back to them in one way or the other. So if you got something, it's probably got a pretty short shelf life.
Yeah, and then you kind of have to do the analysis. Like, I can tell you, there was a player who's taken care of this issue, but he had a very strong physical tell that many of the other high stakes players knew. I'll just say like the North Americans knew about it. The person is European and he was getting crushed for a long time, and unbeknownst to him and whoever he shares action with and whatnot. And he took care of it and it's gone away. But if I were him, I wouldn't have taken care of it. I would have learned how to reverse it. Like, he never spent any time reversing it. And there was so much money to be made for at least a full stop, just reversing the tell. In 2025, I think most of the conversations in intermediate and high-level poker circles, at least for tournaments, tend to be bringing up ICM very often. And one of the kind of telltales that someone's a little bit more basic in their understanding is they say like, oh, was there ICM or no ICM? Kind of treating it like a binary concept.
but embedded in that is this idea that there is a place where it starts. And, you know, you hear theoretically it from the beginning of the tournament. But I guess the question is, when you're coaching, where do you tend to tell people to start not trusting chip EV sims so much and start essentially not playing straight up for chips? And how does that kind of slope just get more and more extreme?
It really does depend on the student. So we were talking earlier about getting an honest sense of what their goals and objectives are, and also their current understanding. And at one end of the extreme, let's say you have someone that says, you know, I play recreationally, not that much. I don't want to devote that much time for studying. Just give me some kind of basic pointers so that I punt a little bit less. I'm fine still kind of losing a little bit. I just want to not lose as much. Then I'll kind of go, you know what, play chip EV up until there's about half the field to a third of the field remaining. And then, ICM pressure gets pretty extreme near the bubble. And then once the bubble bursts, until the last few tables, just go back to playing chip EV. And then it gradually increases towards the final table bubble, and then up until your heads up. And the answer will range from that end of the extremes to what the answer actually is, which is it's nuanced and complicated, and there's never in a tournament 0 ICM, right? Like if I gave anyone the option to pay 2x the buy-in for 2x starting stack, unless it's a particularly unless they're you or it's a particularly soft tournament, even intuitively they understand that they shouldn't do that. And
do they have these tournaments in America where you can enter again even though you've already bagged a stack and you sacrifice your previous one? They're like, let's go, let's try and get a bigger stack.
Well, so again, this was, I know, but this is in the context of, I guess, high rollers and tournaments where you have maybe max at 10-15% ROI, something like that. Mm-hmm. And intuitively, if I gave someone the option to pay half of their buy-in for half of their chips, most people would take it. Again, maybe not in a very soft tournament. But I think most people would be pretty happy doing that. So intuitively, they understand that there is some ICM right from the get-go. And then I try to stress to people that it's the concept of ICM is very fluid. It's on a continuum. It's never black and white. And that is something that I try to stress with the more advanced students. Same thing within the context of ICM. I always try to stress that it's nuanced, it's on a continuum, it's fluid. If you cover someone on the bubble, it matters more how much you cover them by rather than the fact that you just cover them. It is somewhat difficult to get these sort of advanced and nuanced and fluid concepts across because people like to hear very black and white rules. Like when you're in situation A, then B applies, and when you're in situation C, then D applies.
Well, I think you just did a great job of they weren't toy games, but they were experiments when you explain the double buy-in and half buy-in, and that ends up being kind of a black and white way to explain these things, is kind of playing out a lot of toy games.
It gets players to feel something that's not really intuitive, and to get a sense that they actually do on some maybe subconscious or maybe not subconscious level understand it. But if you just ask them, is there ICM on hand one of the tournament?
The same thing like when you talk about covering an opponent. So it can sound like a little jargon heavy if you be like, well, it's the multiple by which you cover them, as opposed to if you say hey, you're four-handed and you're in the small blind with 30 bigs and the big blind has 20. Are you playing any shoves? What are you shoving? And, whatever. We'll not even say the other two stacks. We'll say your chip leader. And then you say, all right, same situation, but instead of 30, you have 120. And like, of course we have shoves. I might shove any two cards. And people intuitively, a lot of people, I'd say, especially if they played poker, they intuitively gravitate the right direction. But sometimes if it's introduced jargon first as opposed to example first, they overcomplicate it or they make it binary.
Yeah, and I like to do an approach where it's from the two extreme ends. So you would give examples like that are just intuitive and that players can just give an answer that they feel is right, and then it's trending in the right direction. And then from the opposite end of the spectrum, I'll do some conceptual toy gamey sort of questions or prompts, such as, we're four-handed at a final table. These are the payouts. Tell me how much this, and that many big blinds are worth in the current stack arrangement. Mm-hmm. And that gets people to have to do something where they give very tangible answers, but have to fit it within this framework of things that they already kind of know, but then give like a concrete answer based on fuzzy concepts. And I think that's always fun approaching it from that end as well.
Yeah. So that brings me back to a concept when it comes to learning poker that I think is important, which is, on the one hand, if you're a tournament player, you can show somebody that a mistake they make with 8 left in a tournament that had 1,000 people that was off by 2 pips can be catastrophic money-wise. The dollar loss can just be egregious. And you show them, hey, look what opening deuce 7 offsuit under the gun first hand for 100 BB with 1,000 people left looks like. The EV loss is very minimal. The dollar loss is nothing. And from that perspective, you say, well, I should only learn, ICM, and this is super important, especially once you have some level of basics for chip EV. But the pushback that I have is not just about EV, but about confidence. You will play final tables so rarely if you play in big fields, especially if you're a live player exclusively, and you play these pre-flop and flop spots for chip EV or close to chip EV so often, both wanting to be at the table and building confidence to execute better and better in all spots is going to be related to how well you execute these repeatable situations. So how do you kind of take that into account when you're thinking about building someone up as a poker player?
I think the focus should be, if you take a particular, not node, but a particular set of game conditions, and you kind of multiply the frequency with which you are in that game state or those game conditions times the average mistake that you're likely to make, that gives you a pretty good idea of what you should focus on. And so the reason that you should, I think, focus on both kind of early to mid stage, basic-ish pre-flop or post-flop mechanics, and also final table ICM, is not because it's just good to learn everything. It's because the mistakes that you can make early on in a tournament are very small, but you're always playing early in a tournament. It's always on you to act first when you're under the gun. So the frequency is quite high, even though the average mistake that you can make is quite low. Once you get to the final table, the frequency with which you even have an opportunity to make a mistake is very, very small, but you can make a rather large mistake. So kind of multiplying frequency times mistake gives you an idea of what you should be working on. And I think generally it leads to you wanting to focus final table or kind of like mid stages. And then maybe there's like another little blip around when the bubble takes place. Although I think if you have a good understanding of final table, that should give you a lot of tools for the bubble as well. And then there's like another complexity layer, which is what you mentioned. You want people to have ability to execute and be confident in the decisions that they're making. And so you got to layer that in as well. If someone's really feeling uncomfortable playing mid-stage chip EV for whatever reason, then maybe focus on that a little bit more than you would optimally if you're just doing kind of the cost of mistake frequency analysis.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a multitude of reasons this happens, but one thing I think about, apologies again to all the non-Americans, but in American football, you often see the quarterback when his offense is not on the field, on the sideline, taking snaps from the center. All the guy's doing is just handing in the ball through his legs, and it's the most basic part of being a quarterback, but it's also the opening to every single play, and I think it kind of instantiates the beginning of each play, even though it's the most basic part. You're gaining confidence that at least that's out of the way, and now I can do the more difficult things, and I'm not going to fuck up this really early portion, which every once in a rare while does get fucked up. They fumble the ball there, but I kind
the
of
frequency is quite high. It's literally
exactly
100%
frequency
of
is
plays
literally
start with
every play. So,
Yeah.
you know, it does go back to what you said too, in terms of, you know, maybe percent of mistake is incredibly low. In this case, the mistakes are extremely damaging, but you're going to have an opportunity every single play. But I think there's also something too that they're doing it mentally just to get
There's a
themselves
meditative
comfortable.
component to it, I would guess.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm
something
not
with
a
that
football
nervous
guy,
energy.
but yeah.
I think it's something about the nervous energy too, which I suggest to a lot of people who don't play a ton to have a routine before they're playing, and especially to have something before they're playing day twos or final tables or whatever is more important to them, where they could kind of get thrown off.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Question about the course that, you know, Tournament Savagery, yours and Nick's course, in terms of how you decided on the source material between what you guys decided was most important for people who are going to buy a course today, and balancing that with what people want, because I'm a strong believer that the customer is not always right when it comes to absorbing poker material. I'm fortunate that all my students get that. It's not really they're not in charge. It's, you don't know what you don't know. But of course, when you don't have a personal relationship and you're developing a course curriculum for people, there are certain things that people really want that may not be as helpful as they think. So I'm curious how you guys kind of compromised, if you did, on that, and what you think are the most helpful parts of the course.
So it was really nice having two people work on the course, not just because the workload is split, but also because I think Nick and I naturally have different types of strengths. So we could both kind of pursue what we wanted and have two different approaches, cover kind of two different areas of what we wanted the course to be. So I tackled a lot of the kind of drier parts of the course, where I'd be looking at mechanics behind unequal stacks or ICM pressure, kind of a lot of borderline toy game stuff, and explaining concepts rather than kind of doing fun stuff or doing hand history reviews or doing deep dives into spots. However, we didn't want to make a course that's just all conceptual and dry, because that's not what people want, and it does get monotonous and boring. And if you put something out where people just get bored after a couple of hours and they don't watch it, then no matter how good the next 20 hours are, if no one watches it, it doesn't make a difference. And so we kind of had this approach where we did the two extremes. So I did a lot of the
conceptual, kind of drier aspects of it. Nick did a lot more in-depth hand review and PO work and post-flop ICM. And I think that not only split the workload, but also let both of us pursue our strengths as teachers. So that was really nice. And naturally, it also balanced out what I think is most beneficial in terms of people actually improving, and then also people getting some entertainment out of the course as well.
So I have watched Ike's multi-way, and I loved it. I've watched some of Nick's hand reviews, as those are a little easier for me to synthesize generally. When I start on your stuff, what is going to be most applicable for me? Where am I going to get the most gains?
I would say you would want to go back and forth between the drier unequal chip EV concept, then some of the ICM toy gaming stuff that explains bet sizes, and then every now and then when that gets a little bit too dry, give yourself a little bit of a dopamine candy and do something like watch something out of like the esoteric spots where you get to overcall wider multi-way or something like that.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell me to do some meth or something.
Oh, I assumed you would be doing meth while watching all my videos.
I mean, got to keep my attention span going. All right. I did this with Kulev. You're going to be number 2.
Okay.
I'm hitting you with some random quotes, and you are going to riff on them however you feel like, which could be a pass. But if you like it, tell me what resonates. If you find that you don't resonate with it at all and actually the opposite, explain.
Okay. These are mainstream quotes or like quotes?
Yeah, they're not poker related, but you can, tie them to poker however you like if you want.
Okay. They're not just like things that Ike has said or something, right?
No.
That would be great too. Ike's got so many great ones.
Yeah. What? One that comes to mind.
If they're playing like they stole it, they probably did.
That's a great one. Oh, man. Give me a number 1 to 8.
So, we were having this conversation about how everyone's going to be picking something like 5 or 6 here. But in order to avoid being a fish, I'm going to actually roll for it. 8.
8.
Ha! You don't even have an 8 because you weren't expecting me to pick it.
I just didn't write them. Had to go to the bottom. Men are more ready to repay an injury than a benefit because gratitude is a burden and revenge a pleasure. I don't want to stoke the flames of these gender wars going on, so we're going to say men is more general. More general. People. I was my niece is she plays basketball for her high school, and multiple times she was talking about their man defense, and I was like, have they not changed that word yet? Is there not? And they're like, my coach tried saying woman and it just didn't work, and no, we play man.
It doesn't really resonate with me. I think it's just making a deeper thing out of a thing that is not that deep.
Good. I can't wait to ruin you for all this fucking bullying. Next number.
4.
4. The evening's the best part of the day. You've done your day's work. Now you can put your feet up and enjoy it.
What even is that?
I find the evening very depressing.
No, I think the best part of the day depends on what you're doing that day. And also, ideally, what you're doing during that day is enjoyable in of itself. And and it just goes against the whole it's all about the process thing. Yeah. And it's just wrong.
Whenever I finish my last very heavy physical activity for the day, which is usually table tennis, that's kind of a letdown.
Yeah, I mean, it's just... who said that?
Kazuo Ishiguro in The Remains of the Day. I don't
Yeah.
remember reading The Remains of the Day, so I'm not sure where I came across it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Kazuro, you're wrong, man.
Another number.
1.
People will go to great lengths to avoid a mild dose of embarrassment.
I mean, sure,
is-
but that doesn't even deserve to be a quote. I don't know.
Really?
C
I like
minus.
Wow. That comes from a man who, when he wanted to go for a run, if he was just in his underwear, would just go out and go for a run in his neighborhood. Didn't give a fuck.
See, that I resonate with a lot.
Yeah.
See, that I like. But the quote itself, yeah, whatever.
Yeah. I think
you know,
would...
I'm a very tough person to please. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, go on. I'll give you another number.
Hit me.
Oh, wait, there's no 0, huh?
No. 1 to 8.
2.
Each time we don't say something we want to say, we're dying.
No, I think that's an awful quote. I think that if that's true, then you're just very externally motivated or based or whatever. I'm not using the right words, but I think that while that is true for some people, if that is true for you, you need to work on yourself.
Heard you here first.
If you feel like you're dying inside, every time you don't say something that you feel you should say, you should work on yourself. Danny D, 2025.
I resonate more with the first version.
Okay, whatever, man.
All right, we are going to break down a hand of yours. This was from WSOP Europe, final day of the 25K in the previously mentioned Razvadov, must visit once. And you've got 6-5 suited on the button here with Michael Rocco in the small blind and Martin Kabrhel in the big blind. You have 19 mil at 400K, and they're both sitting on 12 mil. So immediately, we've got a question here about the 6-5 suited.
Yeah, I think it's reasonably close pre-flop between opening and folding.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, we want to be playing hands that are more blocker oriented at these stack depths and less towards this suited connector low card sort of hand class. However, both of them had been calling quite a bit, and I think maybe not so sure for Rocco, but for Martin maybe a tiny bit more passive than Equilibrium, though I'm just kind of guessing at that and was at the time. And then, of course, the question is Rocco, aggressive player. Do we maybe want to play a little bit tighter than Equilibrium here? And I think it's just important to look at, rather than making broad assessments like, oh, someone's very aggro, they 3-bet a lot, take a look at what the Equilibrium looks like, and chances are you would be surprised at how aggressive and bluff heavy the Equilibrium is for the small blind there, using a lot of offsuit broadways for a bluff, for example. So I thought I could get away with an open here, although it's not exactly printing or mandatory.
Mm-hmm. Fair to say, if the depths get much shorter, this is hitting the muck. Where do you think that point where the 6-5 suited starts to lose some of its luster?
Yeah, right around here. Because if we get much shallower than this, I'm expecting to just get jammed on a lot, and then I just want to open hands that block jams and can just make a high pair and realize that way. Mm-hmm. So the cusp is right around this depth, maybe 25 big blinds. And it would take a specific type of opposition for me to want to open it with, like, let's say 20 to 25 bigs.
Mm-hmm. So Martin's going to hem and haw and probably call with 1 second remaining. Any decision here? King Jack slam dunk defend?
Yeah, I think three betting at some frequency wouldn't be completely absurd either. If any, the standard thing is to call, but we do see three bets from this class of hand quite often, though generally we want to be a tiny bit more polar. But the idea is that I'm going to be flatting three bets with some hands that he dominates, and if he gets shoved on, he's not really folding away that much equity. And it's a way for him to have to depolarize his range a little bit. But the standard thing would be to proceed by calling.
So I can't imagine Martin was playing any leads on this flop, just kind of doing his thing, taking maximum time. But do you think there are any flops with this stack setup where Martin should play some leads for the player in his spot?
Maybe some specific ones would get a little bit of leading, but it would have to be something very specific where my offsuit opens miss it and he is still defending some offsuit hands that connect with it. And ideally where he would be defending hands that actually make a set on those boards. So maybe something like a 6 high, like exactly a 6-5-4, something like that. But there's really not that many.
Sure. How about how you're constructing your flop approach?
So I think this is a better board for me than it would be if we were playing chippy V ranges here. I'm just going to be up against air a little bit more often. And I should clarify what I mean by air. Certainly Martin's range here is going to be tighter than he would be defending for chips, which does mean he'll have top pair more often, but it also means that he is weighted towards having a hand like he has and not a hand that has a gutter here or either the bottom pairs. So a very small bet is going to be extremely effective here, where I just get to deny equity with my pocket pairs, just win the pot with really anything. And it's very hard for him to be able to continue often enough against a very small bet.
You go ahead and bet 1.2 bigs. You think this is close or mandatory continue?
I think this is actually quite close immediately. We have to remember two things. First, Martin should be overfolding by more than he would for chips, given he's under ICM pressure. The second is that King Jack is a lot lower in his range than it normally would be because he's defending a tighter range. So, I spoke about how he is going to lack some of the gutters that would be there for chippy V ranges here and be weighted towards a hand like this. But also at the same time, he should have top pair more often here than he would for chips. So when you combine him wanting to fold a little bit more and him just having something better more often, this being closer towards the bottom of his range. And I would also say that it's not clear that this hand is better than a slightly worse hand with a backdoor flush draw. I do think that this is immediately close for him.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what do you think is an easier continue if you're Martin? Is it King Jack O or King 9 backdoor or Queen 10 backdoor?
I think all of those are worth roughly the same at equilibrium. I would say that against some players, I would always pick the King Jack off. And that's if they're kind of the one and done sort of player, and then I can just win with King High.
Yeah.
And again,
and if you know the range betting, the King Jack's probably going to be doing better.
Yeah. And then against players that are more nuanced, tougher, then I would want something that can that's either going to clearly end up bluffing or just make a really strong hand sometimes. So something like the Queen 10 of diamonds.
Yeah, I have that bias towards either the queen 10 or the king jack, the king 9, and finding like yourself unsure whether or not to bluff rivers in many spots is tricky.
Yeah.
But fortunately, we don't get to choose our cards, so it doesn't matter. Martin's going to check.
Eventually. Oh, wow. They even zoomed in on the...
Yeah, I guess.
but yes, he does not get any leads on this turn, as I'm sure he knows.
So
but
let's
I
talk
think
about
he
your
dropped
spot.
something under the table, so he's looking for it.
I guess one of the ways I tend to think about these spots and try to coach them is to start by thinking about my value threshold. Is that a starting place for you or not really?
Yeah, I would say one of two approaches, and often a mixed approach of the two, which I'll explain shortly, is kind of the way to go. You could do a very analytical sort of breakdown and kind of go, yeah, exactly. Ask yourself, what's my value threshold? Count the combos that you are value betting, and then find some of the best bluffs to balance that with. Or you could take a more intuitive approach, which is kind of like, yeah, I got quite a few hands for value here. I'm clearly going to need some bluffs. What are some of my best bluffs? And where does this hand fit into that? And either approach or a mix of the two.
I was going to say, I do a mix. I don't do the combo count, but I start with the value threshold and then have that gives me a rough idea.
Yeah. And I think I would want to bet a lot of my ace-x hands here, but certainly not all.
Mm-hmm. Do you think you'd want to play any value from a pocket 9s, king 8 suited pocket 10s, or fully polarize here?
I don't think I'd want to fully polarize. I think I'd want to pure check kings, for example, and probably queens. But yeah, the more vulnerable over pairs to the 8, so like 9s, 10s, I think betting at some frequency is good. Betting the turned 8 also, and then simultaneously mixing some checkbacks with like ace 6 especially, and ace 7 would be the way that I approach this spot.
Tournament Savagery is 25 hours of structured tournament strategy by Nick Petrangelo and Daniel Dvoress. This course covers pre-bubble, bubble, in the money, and the final table broken down like never before. We also cover post-flop ICM, blind versus blind, and much more. Buy now for $9.99 only at GTOLab.com.
So you've got what I think appears to most people to be a pretty damn good intuitive bluff while Martin deals with some lint.
Yeah, so it's an intuitive bluff, but I think that it's important to not draw your bluffs only from hands of this class. Your strategy tends to kind of fall apart on the river if you do, because then you end up not having any bluffs on a 5-6 or a 7. And you're not actually blocking any useful things on the river either if the river's a brick.
Yeah.
But if you just barrel some air that is just 2 cards, but both overcards to the 8, ideally heavier weighted towards having a diamond, then that allows you to have some bluffs on all the runouts as well. So yes, I think this is an intuitive bluff no matter how nuanced your game is, but also you want to get to a point where you're looking down at Jack 9 with the
I was just
going
to say Jack 9.
Yeah, and then really that should be an
Yeah.
intuitive bluff for you too, where you're kind of just blocking ace 9, blocking ace jack, have 2 overcards to the 8, can't win at showdown.
Yeah. So the very Disney-esque heuristic that I kind of use in that spot is I say, your frogs on the turn into Prince Charming on the river, and vice versa. The gorgeous looking bluff on the turn, whatever king 5 of diamonds or something turns into a frog on the river, and you're not going to want to follow through with anything that blocked auto call. I mean, maybe the 5's fine, but king queen of diamonds, we'll say. And it holds up very, very often where your attractive, obvious bluffs on the turn just don't want to follow through on the river, and you're, holy shit, I'm not sure if I should be firing this ever on the turn, probably just finishes the job on a lot of rivers.
Yeah, and it can get even more. You obviously gave extreme examples just to really drive the point home, but I gave kind of an intuitive example where I said, if I have Jack 9 with a diamond here, that's a really intuitive high frequency bluff as well. However, if you just have Jack 9 of hearts, that is also a semi-mandatory high frequency intuitive bluff, because if you're only bluffing with the diamond blocker on the turn, then like you said, on the river, it's not a very good hand to bluff. And then you end up thinking you're playing a sophisticated strategy with a lot of mixing, but actually, because of how you've constructed your range, turned yourself into like a one and done player with your bluffs a little bit too often.
Yeah. And I want to make sure for anyone we may have lost there when Dan called Jack 9 of hearts an intuitive bluff, it's relative. Once you kind of grasp some of these concepts, then it looks very intuitive. That's why we both thought of Jack 9 quite quickly is, hey, we're not going to win with Jack high. We have 2 overs to the 8 in case he has 8-5 suited or something like that. And that's where it kind of jumps out. But if Jack 9 is not intuitive to you today, you're not far off from it becoming intuitive.
Yeah, and also to clarify, don't want to go too in depth, but the reason I said Jack 9 of hearts and not Jack 9 of clubs is because Jack 9 of hearts has a tiny bit more fold equity, just unblocking the backdoor flush draws that would continue flop, fold the turn, that a Jack 9 of clubs would block some of. It's not important for your EV to understand these things, but it's important for your overall technical game and being able to conceptualize things to understand how these mechanics work.
Yep. So you bet 2.8. Was it 3.2 in there? Yeah, 3.2. Yeah. So somewhere around 90%, 7/8, whatever that is.
Yeah, I'm pretty much trying to go geometric here. I think it should leave just under pot on the river, which is just kind of how I want to structure most of my value betting range. Of course, some of my current value bets are kind of in between, and something like 9s, I would just check back the river and maybe check back the river with some of my, especially some rivers, some of my ace 9, but really my good ace X hands and better are going to want to be all in by the end of the hand. And so I'm just trying to structure an efficient way to get all the money in.
So you talked about Martin's hand being close on the flop. Leads me to believe there's nothing special about the 8 of diamonds that makes our hand a particularly good catcher. I mean, Jack of diamonds is actually a card you mentioned quickly in the bluffs, and for pretty obvious reasons. Do you think you'd ever make this call as Martin? What do you think's going on that could lead a player to make this call?
So a few things could be going on, some of which could be actually good, and some of which could be an over-adjustment to one particular factor while ignoring everything else. So an example of the latter would be if in Martin's shoes, your thought process is something like, this guy's either got a really strong ace or air, I beat all of his air, and I block ace king and ace jack, call.
If that's exactly the kind of thought line I've gone down and made a call like this for sure.
Yeah, and that I think you need a little bit more. You need a little bit more going on to your thought process than that. However, it's also not too far off.
When you say too much going on, you need more going on. Are you saying there's not enough weight? Those ideas might be correct, but you're adding way too much weight to them?
I mean that you're either adding way too much weight to them, or have not carefully considered the ideas outside of those ideas, which would take some of the weight kind of automatically. And so you're either just overemphasizing those ideas or not considering some other ones. But if you used that exact thought process and made it a little bit more nuanced and considered some of the other factors. So for example, if Martin thought when he bets this size, he's going to be a little bit biased. And I believe, let's say from Martin's perspective, he's kind of going, I believe that Daniel is going to be betting something like king 8 or 9s or 10s here sometimes, but he would cheat a little bit and not bet 2.8 million, but bet 2.4 or 2.2.
Which I think more people than not would.
Yeah, totally valid sort of line of thought. And I also think that if he had something truly good like a set or 2 pair, he would also cheat a little bit and size down. And so when he does use this 2.8, it is truly ace jack, ace queen, ace king, or a bluff, which is kind of where we started, where I said, that's really not enough. But if you've actively thought that, and also that I'm not doing any of the king 8, 10s, 9s sort of mergey thing, and maybe I'm lacking some of the sets, but still using all of my bluffs for this size, it wouldn't take much for it to swing into this potentially being a profitable call. Would I advise making this call? No, but I can see myself, given the right reads, and reads being not necessarily physical reads, but kind of thinking of all the factors that I broke down, I could see things occasionally coming together to where I would continue this, but not as default.
So Martin's eventually going to make the call. Let me ask you, I've been discussing this with a couple of my students who really started off as nits. One of them has this kind of like inflection point in his poker journey where he says, when I look down at Jack 9 suited, now I'm excited to 3-bet. Whereas it used to be that I was just like, I know I'm not supposed to fold here, but I probably supposed to 3-bet some, and I really don't want to. And then there's this kind of excitement. And I told them that for me, and I think a lot of high stakes players, they look down at the flop sometimes and the turn very often. They say, oh, baby, 80% of the time, I'm going to be all in with a bluff with this hand. I know how this one goes. This is a follow through that I'm looking down at. And there's a level of excitement that I'm not going to say it's greater than having a set, but
that resonates with me for sure.
Do you feel like this is a while ago, so you might not remember, but do you feel like you look down at this turn and we're like, oh, here we go?
Yeah, there's also a certain amount of comfort, because if I think down all the possible lines where this hand could end up, my decisions are actually going to be incredibly easy.
That's what I mean, that it's the comfort that it's not that there's actually not a lot of complexity to it. And you look down and you say, oh, I've got king 3 suited on this board. I feel pretty confident him and his close cousins and the king low suited, ace low suited are going to be piling money in. And you're at peace because you don't feel like you're going to blunder. So there's not that nervousness associated with a mistake. And yet, you get to put a lot of chips in.
Yeah, there is that sort of excitement resonates with me for sure.
I almost think I haven't asked enough people, but I almost think there's a separator that it's like, not that you can't be a bad player and have that feeling, but I think it's relatively universal among confident high stakes players that they get excited in that situation in a way that's not wholly dissimilar from having a great value hand.
Yeah, and I think that comes from a deep understanding of, if you're playing competitive poker, bluffs serve a very important and particular function. And it's so that your value can get value. They're not a thing that you do to just be cool or to like win the pot with 6 high or whatever. The function of running this bluff is so that Martin occasionally bluff catches me when I have ace king on various runouts.
Yeah.
And so when you have that deeper understanding, the excitement's the same whether you have the set or the 6 high, because you're kind of executing at this node, which is what leads to you gaining value.
Yeah, the uncomfort comes from being in your shoes with queen 9 of diamonds or ace 9 and trying to be like, I'm not positive how this street and the next street play, and this is tricky and I could make a big mistake here.
Yeah, like, am I supposed to bluff the king of spades river with queen 9 of diamonds? I'm not sure.
Well, fortunately, you have 6-5 of heart. Fortunately, you have 6-5 of hearts. What river are we going to get? Queen of spades. Martin checks with the check mark. Is this an easy decision for you?
So yes and no. I think that the way a computer equilibrium works here is actually quite complex, because I have quite a lot of hands that have 0 pot share, and I don't think I get to bluff literally all of them. And I'm not sure that it's necessarily the case. Actually, I would say that it's not the case that bluffing 6-5 is against the computer better than bluffing something like Jack 10. Jack 10 just blocks his ace 10, his ace jack. So there is some complexity from the trying to emulate a solver or perfect computer play here. I don't think that this is a mandatory bluff in that sort of universe. However, we're not playing against the computer. We're playing against a real human being. And my go-to against real human beings is to lean towards bluffing bottom of range and not bluffing cards that still have no showdown value, but the blocker interactions are not that clear, and maybe, very rarely, but maybe every once in a while, I'll just win the pot here with king high somehow. Or even jack high. I think it's extremely rare, but it's not literally impossible, right? Like, he could have played 6-3 of diamonds this way or something. It's not. It's not.
This one's
actual
tough, but other
impossibility.
spots, I think you do see like 3%ers that take a moment to find.
Yeah. So my approach to these spots is, I actually don't think I have, in theory, one of the better bluffs. I would rather have something like Jack 10 against the computer. However, I'm not sure that blocking the ace 10, ace jack against a human, especially against Martin, outweighs the not the value, but is more valuable than also this hand unblocking a double float, essentially, like this, that Jack 10 would also block. I don't think a computer would have Justin's hand on the river. So of course, having Jack 10 is probably better blockers than 6-5.
Yeah.
So in a sense, it's easy against the human in the way that I'm comfortable executing a strategy. However, if you gave me a poker test where the right answer was, tell me the frequency with which Jack 10 bluffs and with which 6-5 suited bluffs, I would A, not really know the answer, and B, say that probably Jack 10 bluffs more often than 6-5, and that there might be some complexity in mixing that I'm not confident in.
Do you think, so you're going to go ahead and jam this. Do you think in Martin's shoes there are any folds with an ace?
Yes.
Which ace do we not want to be holding?
Ace 7 seems particularly bad. Ace 9 is kind of, if I'm going for value with ace 9 and ace 9 can chop, then, iffy. But the reason that ace 7 is particularly bad is because of blocking 7-6 and 7-5. Potentially some other, just me having a random 9-7 and deciding to rifle it off sort of bluffs. And it obviously doesn't block any value, but blocks some of my most intuitive bluffs. Ace 6, kind of same thing. I think something like ace 3 is going to be better than ace 7 for Martin. And then I think against a human, I think ace 9 is going to be better than ace 7 or ace 6, because again, there's no guarantee that I'm not going for value with ace 9. In fact, I'm not sure whether I would have gone for value with ace 9 or not in my shoes. And even if I am sure now, there's no question, there's no guarantee that I would have executed that correctly at the time. So
yeah, the ace 9 I think is a great topic of conversation for different villains and different dynamics here, because if we think the player in your shoes is not playing this line with ace 9, and I do think that there are still plenty of players, even in high rollers, some players that you can just about cross it off outside of them kind of having a brain freeze. I'm not saying it's bad, but it would take their brain freezing for them to rifle it off with ace 9 here. If that's the case, and they're still opening 10-9-0, Jack 9-0, Queen 9, well, Queen 9 doesn't matter at this point, but the 10-9, Jack 9, that's a multitude of bluffs that your 9 is blocking. Whereas when you talk about the 7-6, 7-5, it's only a few combos of suited. So, if they do hit on the 10-9, Jack 9 being attractive bluffing candidates on the turn, that 9 can be a devastating blocker. And even if they half the time take this line with ace 9 for value, we're talking about a 50% pot share half the time. It's kind of like, the value there starts to get really small if we're just hoping to chop. Now, of course, if they brain freeze 1 pip lower, which it is, a pretty big tipping point, but the ace 7, and all of a sudden we have a full pot share, then it starts to look pretty unfoldable.
yeah, and the way that the actual equilibrium works, it's so dynamic in terms of influence. For example, I was just listing off. You asked me if I think that Martin gets to fold some ace-x hands. And I think that, yes, I could be wrong, but I think that in this line, his worst ace-x hands should be indifferent. Let's just assume that that premise is true. And then we can extend it to, okay, so one of his worst aces to call is ace 6. So I expect him to fold it a little bit more often, or just clearly more often than some of his other ace-x hands. Well, I have a 6 in my hand. So now I kind of don't want to bluff it because I actually block an ace that he folds. So it's very dynamic in terms of this sort of influence. And this is what I was talking about when I was saying kind of complexity of what the hand would look like in a solver, and what leads to a lot of mixing. Like, why would you want to mix some Jack 10, some 6-5? To make the kickers more uniformly indifferent.
Yeah, blockers are very convoluted. And I think working back from the river is where you really gain your best understanding of what's going on there. When you say, like, this makes no sense, why ace 7 is a call and ace 9 is a fold, like there's possibility that this situation look like that if ace 9 doesn't take the value line for you, for example. And then, you do a little bit of detective work going backwards and you find out the reason why. It tends to be very logical.
Yeah.
Logical, but convoluted. So now we get to delight in a Martin tank.
Oh yeah, I had
this guy took some time.
Yeah.
Wasn't. Show me. Come on. No.
After he folded, or actually maybe even before he folded, he did say, "Do I have 6-5?" So he did end up reading my hand right, but not executing on the superhero call down. Luckily.
Yeah,
for me.
and that's interesting that he guesses that a hand that you would only have 4 combos of, and maybe don't even use the 6-5 of diamonds, whereas you were just talking about how the Jack 10, which has more combos for sure, might have been a better bluff. So almost maybe betraying something about how he sees the situation, if he makes that guess.
Yeah, I mean, he's a complex person.
I guess he has a Jack in his hand too.
Yeah, and he's got a Jack in his hand, though I shouldn't really be bluffing with the Jack of diamonds anyway, so
True.
who knows what Martin's thinking.
This is quite accurate. So Martin did go really deep into the tank with King Jack, and it's not impossible. You just get heroed there with King High. Let's live in that world for a minute. As painful as it is, afterwards, let's say you end up exiting in third. Does it affect how you analyze that hand? We say not to be results oriented, but in one of the early podcasts, I had Ponikov's on, and he talked about, I can't remember his exact phrasing, but you do have to be somewhat results oriented. You need to take what people do into account. How do you, if you looked at it and the solver said 6-5's a bluff, I imagine that's not the end of the story and you saying, good job, you did good. And by the same token, I imagine you're not saying, well, if he calls with that hand that's supposed to fold turn and river, then this is definitely bad. How do you make sense of that? How do you go forward after you lick your wounds there and try to recover what information there is?
So a couple of things. First, it's dynamic to where, in the sense that he's adjusting to all of this information as well.
Sure.
Had he called me down with King High, he also knows that he called me down with King High. And this is where it kind of gets into this sort of leveling thing of, would I bluff him again, given that he called me down with King High? Maybe it's a better spot to...
We already said you're half retarded. Of course you would.
Yeah, it seems like an even better spot to run a bluff with him next time. He's not going to call me down with King High twice. So, there's that complexity in the dynamic nature of it. I would say this. I think that what Ponikov said in terms of, you have to be a little bit results oriented in the sense that it's such an outlier of a showdown that it has to have some weight. Mm-hmm. But against sophisticated players, I don't think that means that you should just make a complete adjustment into the other extreme right away. If it's up against a whale who is going to just kind of play one sort of strategy, or maybe they play different strategies depending on mood, but in a certain mood, always play one strategy, that's one thing. But with someone sophisticated, there's the dynamic nature of it, and a much better adjustment would be to do something like widen my value range by a couple of pips. So maybe now I'm a 7+ for value in an identical spot on the river, and keep bluffing the combos that I'm currently bluffing, or maybe shave off a little bit of a bluffing frequency. And I think what people don't realize is how much of an exploit that already is. I think people tend to see these things as like a very black and white, like, oh my God, if he just calls me down with King High, I should never bluff and just have my value, and that's how I'm going to approach this node now. That is such an extreme adjustment, which you might get to make eventually, but me bluffing a little bit less often while having a wider value range is already making his calls very unprofitable. All of his mixes are going to be losing a ton, and that adjustment of a 7+ for value, shave off a little bit of my bluff combos, I think people don't get how harsh of an adjustment that already is. And so I would just skew things a little bit. And then maybe if he calls me down with King High again, I'll skew it a little bit more. And then maybe the third time he calls me down with King High, then I'll start not really bluffing him. And then if he folds a couple of rivers against me, I'll start bluffing again. But I think you got to make it in incremental steps, the adjustment, and not something super drastic off of one showdown.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the difference between gouging somebody for their aggressive nature and kind of what's the word? What's Neville Chamberlain famous for? Not appeasing someone. You know what I'm talking about?
I don't.
When Hitler invaded the Sudetenland and they did nothing. I mean, I feel like if I look up Neville Chamberlain, it's the first word. Oh, it just says appeasement. It's not really what I'm going for. But it's the difference between, being like, oh, this person 3-bets me too much. I'll start limping. What? No, just you'll have it sometimes, and they're going to get hurt when you have it. Or you start 4-bet bluffing them a little bit more, or you 4-bet value a little bit wider.
Or open a pip tighter. Or
Well, that's still a little bit of appeasement, but yeah. We have reached the 3 recommendations stage of the podcast. Can you offer up 3 recommendations of any kind?
So I'll get 3 books in no particular order, and I think there's some great books outside of these, but they tend to be a little bit more mainstream. So I'll give kind of the less mainstream suggestions. First one is The Outlaw Ocean by Ian Urbina. Second one is Your Inner Fish by Neil Shubin, and not what you think. It's more of a paleontology, archaeology sort of thing, and more about evolution, not about being a fish at the poker table. And lastly, this is a bit of an outlier, but Breath by James Nestor.
I just started on that.
Yeah, I can see you're not mouth breathing. Good job.
Daniel Dvoress, thank you.
Thank you.